Bedtime Reading. Journey to the Center of the Earth. Introduction. Jules Verne was born in 1828 into a sea-loving family in France. At an early age, he tried to run away to join a ship, but his family found him before he left, and he came back to continue his studies. He was then sent to Paris to study law, but once there, fell in love with theater. He was soon writing plays, but his father then declared that Jules would no longer receive his living allowance if he did not return to practice law. Jules refused and was forced to make a living by selling his stories. In his writing, he combined his gift of storytelling with his interest in the latest scientific discoveries. He spent many hours in Paris libraries studying scientific matters. Journey to the Center of the Earth takes place in the mid-1800s, beginning in Germany. In the book, a strange German professor, Professor Lidenbrock, discovers ancient papers from Iceland and attempts to learn the meaning of the mysterious writings. His nephew, Axel, finally discovers the writing's secret, which tells of a hidden underground pathway leading to the center of the earth. Although Axel has many doubts about the journey, Professor Lidenbrock persuades him to join him on the trip, traveling to Iceland, then deep into the earth, where they discover a new world of ancient animals and an underground sea. Chapter 1. On May 24th, 1863, a Sunday, my uncle, Professor Lidenbrock, came hurrying back to his little house on one of the oldest streets in Hamburg, Germany. He rushed through the dining room and straight into his study. As he walked through the house, he saw me nearby and quickly said, "Axel, come with me," before continuing on. Just a moment later, he shouted, "Well, why aren't you here yet?" He was a professor at a local university, where he taught a course in earth studies and became quite angry once or twice during each class. He was certainly not concerned that his students benefited from his class, or if they paid attention to his lectures. He cared very little about such matters. He taught rather for himself. He enjoyed hearing his own voice and thoughts. There are a number of professors like that in Germany. Unfortunately, my uncle sometimes had difficulty with his speech. During his lectures at the university, he would often stop while speaking, struggling to pronounce a word, and finally his speech would explode into a burst of swear words. This habit of my uncle's was well known in the town, and he was often joked about. His students would wait for him to begin a difficult word, after which he would quickly become angry. However, my uncle was still a scientist and loved his work. He was often awake all night, testing new methods of study or excitedly writing about his findings. Therefore, he was greatly respected in schools and among other professors and scientists. This, then, was the man who called me to him so impatiently. He was a tall, thin, healthy man in his 50s. He lived in his little house made of brick and wood. The house was quite old and in rather poor condition. Yet my uncle was quite wealthy for a German professor. He owned the home himself and all the contents inside, aside from Martha, the maid, Grauben, his 17-year-old goddaughter, and myself. Her parents had died long ago, and he was now to take care of her. Being his nephew, I had become his assistant after coming to live with him after my parents both died. I must admit that I quickly came to admire his work, and I was never bored with the work he gave me. I was able to live happily in that little house, and although its owner was quite impatient, he was quite fond of me. Chapter 2. In his study, every rock and piece of earth was carefully labeled. How well I knew each one! How often, instead of playing with boys my age, I had taken pleasure in carefully cleaning each of those containers. When I arrived in my uncle's study, he was sitting in his big chair, holding a book and looking at it with deep wonder and respect. "What a book! What a book!" My uncle was also a book collector in his spare time, but he only valued books that were rare or unreadable. "Well," he said to me, "can't you see what it is? It's a treasure. I found it this morning at the bookshop." "It's wonderful," I answered. I couldn't see why he was so excited over an old book, but he went on complimenting the book with excitement. "Look, isn't it beautiful?" he asked. Then answered his own question. "Yes, it's incredible. After 700 years, and it still looks excellent." As he spoke, my uncle kept opening and closing the old book. "And what's the title of that wonderful book?" I asked, truly eager to discover the reason for such excitement. "This book," he answered, becoming more excited, "is the Heimskringla by Snorri Sturluson, the famous author of the 12th century from Iceland. It's a book about the princes from Norway who ruled Iceland." "Really?" I exclaimed. "Has it been translated into German, then?" "What? A translation?" he exclaimed. "Why would I want a translation? This is the original book in the language spoken in Iceland, Icelandic, an amazing language. This is the original writing in the ancient characters of the alphabet used long ago in Iceland. Come here and admire these letters." Just as I went to him, an old piece of writing fell out of the book. My uncle bent down and picked it up with eagerness. "What's this?" he cried. And he carefully unfolded the paper on the table to examine it. There were rows of signs that I could not understand. The professor examined the signs a few moments, then said, "These are ancient characters, exactly the same as the ones in Snorri Sturluson's book. But what can they mean?" After a short silence, he continued thinking aloud. "Yet it has to be Old Icelandic." And he must have known whether it was or not, because he was famous for his knowledge of languages. He could speak a great number of languages quite well. Martha then entered the room to announce that lunch was ready. "I don't want the lunch," my uncle shouted. "Now leave me." Martha left the room immediately. I hurried after her and into the dining room to eat. I waited a few minutes. My uncle didn't come. It was the first time that he refused to come for a meal. As a loving nephew, I felt it was my duty to eat for him as well as for myself, and I did with eagerness.
"I can't believe this,"
Martha said.
"Mr. Lidenbrock isn't here for the meal."
I was finishing the last bit of lunch when I heard a loud voice. I ran from the dining room to the study immediately. Chapter 3. "It's obviously ancient Icelandic," the professor said, "but there's a secret in it, and I'll find out what it is or else—" After a few moments, he spoke to me hurriedly, saying, "Sit down there and write. I'm going to tell you the letters of our alphabet that match these Icelandic characters. Then we'll see what we find then. But be sure you don't make any mistakes." He began speaking. I listened as carefully as I could. The letters were called out and formed this confusing group of words. M.RNLLS, ESREUEL, SEECJDE, SJTSSMF, UNTEIEF, NIEDRKE, KT, SAMN, ATRATES, SAODRRN, EMTNAEI, NUAECT, RRILSA, ATVAAR, period, NSCRC, IEAABS, CCDRMI, EEUTUL, FRANTU, DT, IAC, OSEIBO, KEDIIY. When this work was done, my uncle grabbed the sheet of paper I had been writing on and examined it attentively for a long time. "What does it mean?" he kept repeating to himself. "This is a cryptogram, which means that its meaning is hidden behind the letters, which have been purposely confused. If we arrange the words in the correct order, we will discover the meaning." My uncle continued to carefully examine the paper. "Arne Sacnussemm," he cried out. "He was a scientist, one of the only scientists of that time. They made discoveries that can only be described as amazing. Why wouldn't Sacnussemm have hidden an incredible invention behind this confusing cryptogram? That must be it. That is it." "Perhaps so," I answered, "but why would he have to hide his incredible invention?" Why? How should I know? Anyway, I'm going to discover the secret of this document. I won't eat or sleep till I've done it. And neither will you, Axel," he declared. "I'm lucky I ate 2 dinners today," I told myself. "First of all," my uncle said, "we must find out what language the message is written in. That shouldn't be hard. The language looks a bit like Latin, the language that was commonly used among scientists during that time." "Enjoy yourself, Uncle," I thought. "If you can discover it, you're a clever man." I stopped listening to his words as I was looking at a charming picture on the wall, a picture of Grauben, my uncle's goddaughter, who was living with the old professor as well. She was visiting one of her relatives in Altona, and her absence made me very sad because, I can admit it now, she and I loved each other with good German patience. We were engaged, although we were keeping such information from my uncle, who, as a scientist, could not understand such emotions. Grauben, a lovely young woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, was rather quiet and serious, but she loved me. As for me, I respected and loved her dearly. As I stared at her picture, I remembered the days when she helped me arrange my uncle's important stones. She had a great deal of knowledge about earth studies as well. She liked solving difficult scientific problems. We had so many delightful hours studying together. We would often go out walking together, holding hands as we went. Just then, my thoughts were interrupted by my uncle's eager exclamation. "Yes," he said, "I must first write the letters of the sentence vertically instead of horizontally to discover the meaning." He then turned to me. "Let's see what it looks like, Axel. Take this paper and write a sentence on it. Any sentence. But instead of writing the words in the usual way, write them vertically." I understood what he meant and immediately wrote the following. IOAGN LURR period O, LA VMIU EYNB YDGE. "Good," the professor said after reading this. And now write down the horizontal rows one after another. I did as he said, with this result. IOAGN LURR period O, LA VMIU EYNB YDGE. Excellent, he said, grabbing the paper from me. I don't know the sentence you wrote, he continued, but I can read it by taking the first letter of each word, then the second, then the third, and so on. Then, to his great surprise, and even more to mine, he read aloud, I love you, my darling Grauben. What? He exclaimed. Yes, I had written that embarrassing sentence without realizing what I was doing. Ah, so you love Grauben, do you? My uncle asked seriously, remembering that I was his nephew. Yes. No, I said quietly. So you love Grauben, he repeated. Now, let's use this method to discover the secret of this mysterious Icelandic writing. He then forgot what I had just foolishly admitted and continued with the discovery. I was then told to write down the next set of words, and this was what was found. MESSUNKA SENRA period ICE FDOK period SEGNITTAMURTN ECERTSERRETTE, comma, ROTAIVSADUA, comma, EDNE CSEDSADNE LACARTNIIILU JSIRATRAC SARBMUT ABILEDMEK MERETARCSILUCOY SLEFFENSI. I must admit that I was excited when I came to the end. Those letters had seemed meaningless to me as I wrote them, but I expected to hear the professor read off a fantastic Latin sentence. I was quite confused at what happened instead. He shook the table violently with anger. "No, that's not it," he shouted. "It doesn't make sense." Then he ran across the study, went down the stairs, rushed out of the house, and hurried away as quickly as he could. Chapter 4.
Is he gone?
Martha asked, after hearing the front door close loudly. "Yes," I answered, "completely gone."
But what about his lunch?
He won't have any lunch today.
And his dinner?
No dinner either.
What?
Cried the old servant. No, Martha, he won't eat any more, and neither will anyone else in this house. He won't allow any of us to eat until he's discovered the meaning of the old writings he found that are unreadable.
My God! You mean we're going to starve?
She said before she ran out of the room. I feared that with my uncle's stubbornness, Martha could be right, but I did not tell her. I then thought of going to tell Grauben everything, but I realized that I could not leave, or my uncle might return while I was gone. What would happen if he came back while I was away? He would be terribly upset. Therefore, I stayed there waiting for him. After nervously walking around the room for some time, I sat down in my uncle's old chair in his study to examine the mysterious piece of ancient writing. I soon noticed that the 14th, 15th, and 16th letters formed the English word ice, that the 84th, 85th, and 86th letters formed sir, that a few Latin words appeared in the second and third lines, and I recognized 3 French words on the 4th line. It was crazy. 4 different languages in that silly sentence. What connection could there be between such words as ice, sir, anger, cruel, wood, changeable, mother, and sea? I could easily connect the words ice and sea with Iceland, but not the rest. I struggled for quite some time with this mysterious message containing 132 letters. I was warm and needed air. I then fanned myself with the paper, and as a result saw the letters from back to front and made a discovery. I was shocked when I recognized words in Latin when I read the document from back to front. After a short walk around the room to calm myself, I sat down to read the mysterious document. But then I was filled with amazement and terror. A man had been courageous enough to— "Oh, no!" I cried out. "I mustn't let my uncle know about this. He'd want to try it too. He would risk everything, and he'd take me with him, and we'd never come back. Never." I then decided that I must destroy the document so my uncle would never discover its meaning. I walked to the fireplace, as there was a little fire still burning. Just as I was going to throw the paper into the fire, the door to the study opened, and my uncle quickly walked in. Chapter 5. I hardly had time to put down the document on the table before he came in. Professor Lidenbrock was still thinking of nothing but the ancient piece of writing after he returned from his walk. As soon as he walked into the study, he sat down in his armchair and again attempted to discover the meaning. I watched him closely as he worked. Was he about to understand the secret meaning? I was worried that he would soon find out, and would then force me to go on a journey with him to the center of the earth, which the ancient writing states is possible. For 3 long hours my uncle worked without stopping for a moment. Soon it became dark out. Still working in his study, my uncle saw nothing but the piece of ancient writing in front of him. I soon fell asleep on the sofa, while my uncle went on working. When I woke up the next morning, my poor uncle was still working to discover the meaning, with red eyes and a pale face. I really pitied him. He was so concerned with finding out the meaning that he forgot all other emotions. I could have told him the meaning of the writing, but I did not. Why did I remain silent? Because I felt my uncle would not benefit from such knowledge. No, I thought, I won't tell him. He'd want to go there, and he'd risk his life to go. I won't tell him the secret. Let him find it by himself if he can. After deciding not to tell him, I sat quietly watching him until a few hours later. Martha tried to leave the house to go to the market, but found the door locked. The key was no longer in the door. My uncle, of course, had taken it, after he promised that no one would eat until he discovered the meaning of the writing. Martha and I would be forced to suffer because of a situation that didn't concern us. I remember that my uncle had refused to eat for 2 days while he performed a great scientific experiment, and he had not allowed the rest of us in the house to eat either. I now realized that we were not going to eat breakfast, as there was no food in the house, and we were not allowed to leave. We had not had dinner the night before, but I still would not tell him the secret meaning. My uncle was still working, thinking of nothing but the mysterious writing. Toward noon, I was growing quite hungry, but I refused to give in. It was my duty not to. So I waited. It was now 2 o'clock. This was becoming quite foolish, even unbearable. I then thought that perhaps if I told my uncle the meaning of the document, he would think it was a fake, and there would be no problem. I would have strongly rejected this idea the day before, but now it seemed to be an excellent option. I decided then that I must go tell my uncle immediately. I was trying to think of a manner to tell him when he stood up and put on his hat to leave. I had to tell him then, or he would lock us in the house again with no food. "Uncle," I said, "what about the hidden meaning?" He looked at me seriously, then grabbed my shirt tightly. He then realized that I had discovered the meaning. He looked down, pitying himself. "You must start to read it from the end, not the beginning," I continued. Before I finished explaining, I heard him cry out. "Ah, you clever old Sacnussemm!" he exclaimed. "So you wrote your sentence backward!" He picked up the document and read it with tears in his eyes. The writing was originally in Latin, but the English translation is as follows. "Go down into the mountain of Sneffels, in which the sun will shine into before the end of July. Daring traveler, and you will reach the center of the earth, which I have done, Arni Sacnussemm." After reading this, my uncle jumped out of his chair. He looked overjoyed and determined. After thinking for a few moments, he began to speak. "What time is it?" he asked. 3 o'clock, I answered. "Really? I'm already hungry again. Let's go eat, and then..." "And then?" "You'll pack my suitcase." "What?" I exclaimed. "And your own," he said, going into the dining room. Chapter 6. I was quite worried after hearing such words, but my hunger was at that moment more important. We went to the dining room to wait for Martha to make lunch. During the meal, my uncle was quite content and talkative. After finishing, my uncle asked me to follow him into his study. "Axel," he said gently, "you're a clever boy. You helped me a great deal. I'll never forget what you did. You'll share in this fame when we return from the center of the earth." I then decided that since my uncle was in a good mood, I must talk to him about his crazy plans for us. "Uncle, how do you know this document is indeed real? Isn't it possible that this writing is a fake? Do you even know where Sneffels is? I've never heard of it." "That's easy to explain. Sneffels is a volcano in Iceland, although the volcano has been dead for several hundred years. Its last volcanic explosion was in 1219. We'll go into the center of the earth through the hole in the volcano." Seeing how confident my uncle was about his decision to go to the center of the earth, I realized that there was no way I could persuade him not to go, and I would be forced to go along as well. "Yes, I believe this document could be real," I said, "and perhaps Sacnussemm did go to the center of the earth, but I do not believe he could have gone and come back from the center of the earth alone." "And why do you have such an opinion?" my uncle asked with a smile. "Most scientists say it cannot be done. They believe the earth is quite hot at the center of the earth, which would not allow us to reach the center alive. It is well known that heat rises about 1 degree for every 40 feet below the surface of the earth. From the surface of the earth to the center, there is a distance of nearly 3,800 miles, so the temperature at the center of the earth should be about 500,000 degrees. "So, it's the heat that bothers you, Axel," my uncle responded, ready to laugh at my fears. "No one has ever explored the inside of the earth, and we know that such beliefs about the inside of the earth may be wrong. So, I believe that we should examine it for ourselves." Perhaps Sacnussemm did indeed travel to the center of the earth. Now, we must try for ourselves, as no one else knows what is really inside the earth. We know that the number of volcanoes has greatly declined since the beginning of the world. This means that the heat at the center of the earth, which causes volcanoes to explode, has greatly declined as well. Yes, it is possible," I said, persuaded by my uncle's strong arguments. "It's certain," my uncle said, looking quite delighted. "But keep quiet about all this. You understand? We mustn't let anyone else know about our idea to explore the center of the earth." Chapter 7. After my exciting conversation with my uncle, I was eager to start our adventure, but I felt quite confused after I left his study. I left the house to take a walk to calm myself. After I became calmer, I thought more about what my uncle had said. "It's crazy," I exclaimed. "It makes no sense. It's not a serious plan. Nothing of all that is real." Meanwhile, I had walked to the river near the outside of the city. After a short time, I arrived at Grauben's relative's home, just as she was leaving to return to my uncle's home. "Grauben," I called out. She soon noticed me walking to her.
"Axel!"
she said, surprised.
"You've come to meet me. That's very nice of you."
She then noticed how worried I looked.
"What's the matter?"
she asked. "I'll tell you what's the matter, Grauben," I said. I then explained the situation to her in a few sentences. When I finished, she was silent. After a short time, however, she spoke.
"Axel,"
she said quietly,
"it will be a wonderful trip."
I was shocked to hear such words. She was so brave to speak such encouraging words. She was insisting that I go, even though she loved me. "Grauben," I said, "we'll see if you still talk that way tomorrow."
"Tomorrow, Axel, I'll still talk the same way."
As we walked back to my uncle's house, I thought, it's still a long time till the 1st of July. Perhaps my uncle will change his mind or forget about his crazy idea to go to the center of the earth. It was quite late by the time we returned. I expected that my uncle would be asleep, as he regularly went to bed quite early. But I had forgotten about my uncle's impatience and interest in his new findings. As soon as we walked in the door, my uncle walked to me quickly, saying, "Come, Axel! Hurry, you foolish boy! Your suitcase isn't packed yet." I was shocked. "We're going very soon. Why did you go on a walk instead of staying here to help me?" "We're going?" I said, quite confused. "Yes, the day after tomorrow, early in the morning." I could not bear to listen to him any longer. I left him and returned to my room. I slept very little that night, worrying about my uncle's foolish plans. The next morning I heard the sweet voice of Grauben calling to me.
"My dearest Axel, come out of your room."
I came out and was greatly calmed after looking into her beautiful face.
"Ah, my dearest Axel,"
she said.
"I see you're feeling better. You look more calm than you were yesterday."
I was quite surprised to hear such words, as I felt quite a bit more worried than last night.
"Axel, I've had a long talk with your uncle." He is a brave scientist, and I know you are as well. You must trust him. Oh, Axel, you'll share in his fame. When you come back, you'll be a man.
Her words gave me courage, but I was still upset, and went to my uncle's study to speak to him about my fears. "Uncle," I asked, "why are you in such a hurry to be gone? Today is only the 26th of May. We still have time before we have to go." "Do you think it's so quick and easy to get to Iceland, you fool? If you'd not left me yesterday, we could have gone on a ship leaving for Copenhagen. There's only one ship going from Copenhagen, Denmark, to Rakiovic, the city in Iceland where the volcano is. That ship leaves on the 22nd of each month. If we had waited till the 22nd of June to leave from Copenhagen for Rakiovic, we'd arrive too late to see the shadow in the volcano that will lead us into the earth. Now, we have to find some other way to get to Iceland. Go and pack your suitcase." There was nothing for me to say. I went back to my room. Grauben came with me. She was not excited for me to leave, but she spoke calmly, which eased my fears about the coming journey. We finished packing my suitcase and went downstairs. All throughout the day there were deliveries of scientific instruments, weapons, and other things we would take on our journey. Night came. I was too worried to think of the passing time. "I'll see you in the morning," my uncle said. "We'll leave at 6 o'clock. During the night my terrors returned. I had terrible dreams of falling into the earth and never returning. I woke up at 5 o'clock, tired and anxious. I went down to the dining room. My uncle was already there, eating quickly. Grauben was there as well. I said nothing. I couldn't eat. Soon we prepared to leave. Grauben kissed me on the cheek before I left. With a tear in her eye, she said,
"Go, my dearest Axel, go! You're leaving your fiancé, but you'll find your wife when you come back."
Chapter 8. At 7 o'clock in the morning, we were on a train going to Kiel, a northern city in Germany, after which we would take a ship to Copenhagen, the capital of Denmark. My uncle was busy with planning our adventure, while I sat in silence, worried over our coming journey. We soon arrived in Kiel, and discovered that my uncle had miscalculated the time of the ship's leaving. We were in Kiel in the morning and realized the ship would not leave till the evening. We were forced to spend an entire day in Kiel before leaving for Copenhagen. Finally, the day passed, and at 10:15 at night, we were safely on the moving ship. The next morning at 10 o'clock, we arrived in Copenhagen. We quickly went to our hotel to shower and get ready for the next day. The hotel clerk spoke Danish and English, but my uncle, who spoke several languages quite well, questioned the clerk in good Danish. My uncle soon arranged for us to take a small ship to Iceland. When the arrangements were made, my uncle was overjoyed at his success in finding a ship to take us. He eagerly thanked the captain of the ship, who was quite surprised at my uncle's excitement, as he rowed to Iceland quite regularly. The captain, of course, did not know of our plans to journey to the center of the earth, as this secret would be kept from everyone. Seeing my uncle's great happiness at going to Iceland, the captain decided to charge us double the fee to go there, but my uncle was not bothered by such details. We would leave on June 2nd, going to the capital of Iceland, Rakiovic. Until we departed for Iceland, I spent a great deal of time walking around Copenhagen, thinking of my darling Grauben. What delightful walks Grauben and I could have taken along the sea. But my darling Grauben was far away, and I wasn't sure if I would ever see her again. My uncle was not concerned with the beautiful views of Copenhagen, but he did take interest in the sight of a tower on a nearby island. After spotting the tower, he declared that we would go there and immediately arranged for a small ship to take us there. "We're going up there," my uncle said. "But it will make me dizzy," I exclaimed. "That is the reason we are going. You must get used to climbing, as we'll have to climb a mountain in Iceland, then climb down to the center of the earth." "But—" "Come, let's not waste time." I did become quite dizzy as we walked up, then down the many stairs of the tower. After coming down the stairs, I felt tired and sick, but my uncle was not concerned with this. "We'll do it again tomorrow," he said. For the next 5 days, I repeated that exercise, which made me rather dizzy each time. Chapter 9. The day of departure came. On June 2nd, at 6 in the morning, we boarded the ship. "How long will we be at sea?" my uncle asked the captain of the ship. "About 10 days, if we don't have weather problems." "But don't you sometimes have long delays?" "No, Mr. Lidenbrock, don't worry. We'll get there." There were no problems during the voyage, although my uncle was quite upset and ashamed that he became seasick during the entire ship ride. He was, therefore, unable to talk with the captain about Sneffels. He spent his time lying down. I must admit that he deserved this. On June 13th we arrived in Rakiovic. The professor came out of his room a little pale, still ill, but looking excited, with a look of satisfaction. He called me to him and pointed to a mountain in the distance. "There's Sneffels," he cried. "Sneffels!" We stepped off the ship and were met by an Icelandic scientist and the mayor of the town, who spoke to my uncle in Danish. I, of course, did not understand a word of their conversation. The Icelandic scientist was also a teacher of natural science at the Rakiovic school. He insisted that we stay with him in his home. After arriving and getting settled, my uncle seemed quite content. "Well, Axel," he said to me, "things are going well, and the hardest part is over." "The hardest part?" "Of course. Now all we have to do is go down." "I suppose. But after we've gone down, we'll have to come back up, won't we?" "Oh, I'm not worried about that. We have very little time now, so I'm going to the library. There may be documents there written by Sacnussemm, and if so, I'll be very glad to read them. In the meantime, I'm going to walk around the town. Aren't you going to do that too?" "It doesn't really interest me," my uncle said. "What's interesting here in Iceland is under the ground, not above it." It was not difficult to walk around Rakiovic, as the capital city only had 2 streets. Within 3 hours I had seen the entire town. There were no trees and very little plant life at all. The Icelanders' small homes were made of earth and leaves. When I returned to the scientist's home, I found my uncle already there, sitting with our host, the Icelandic scientist. Chapter 10. Dinner was ready. My uncle ate a great deal, as he had eaten very little during our sea voyage from Copenhagen. The conversation during the meal between my uncle and our host was in Icelandic, but my uncle occasionally gave me a German translation, and our host a Latin one. They discussed scientific matters. My uncle, however, said very little, refusing to say anything about our plans to travel to the center of the earth. First, our host, Mr. Fredrickson, asked my uncle if he enjoyed his visit to the library. "The library!" the professor exclaimed. "There's nothing but a few old books on almost empty shelves." "What?" Mr. Fredrickson said. "We have 8,000 books. Many of them are rare and valuable. We also have many new books that are sent to us from Copenhagen every year." "Where do you keep those 8,000 books? I couldn't see." "They're all over the country, Mr. Lidenbrock. The people of our old icy island love to study. There's not one farmer or fisherman who doesn't know how to read, and all of them do read. We feel that books should not be kept on shelves, but should be read. Our people will read the books, then pass them on to others to read. The books often don't return to the library for a year or two." "And during that time," my uncle said, looking annoyed, "foreigners—" "What do you mean? Foreigners have libraries in their own countries. Our peasants must be able to educate themselves. As I've said, Icelanders love to study. Now, if you tell me which books you hope to find in our library, I may be able to give you some information about them." I looked at my uncle. He paused before he answered. After thinking a while, however, he decided to speak. "I wanted to know if you have any books written by Árni Sacnussemm." "Árni Sacnussemm? Are you talking about the great 16th century scientist, who was also a great traveler?" "Exactly. A man who had both courage and intelligence." "Yes, he certainly did. Well, what about his books?" "Ah, his books. We don't have them." "What? You don't have them here in Iceland?" "They aren't in Iceland, nor are they anywhere else in the world." "Why not?" "Because the government declared Árni Sacnussemm to be insane. In 1573, his books were burned in Copenhagen." "Good! Wonderful!" cried my uncle. Mr. Fredrickson was shocked. "What do you mean?" asked the Icelandic scientist. "Yes, I understand everything now. He was forced to hide his discoveries he'd made, and he had to use a secret code." "What secret?" Mr. Fredrickson asked, with a bit of anger in his voice. "A secret that—" "Do you have some special document?" "No, I was only thinking of such possibilities." "Very well," said Mr. Fredrickson, asking nothing more about it. "Mr. Lidenbrock, I hope you will explore our island before leaving. There are many mountains and volcanoes that still need to be studied, because very little is known about them. You see that mountain?" he said as he pointed into the distance. "That's Sneffels." "Ah, Sneffels. It's one of our most interesting volcanoes, yet people seldom visit it." "Well, then," my uncle said, trying to hide his eagerness, "I'd like to begin my studies with Sneffels. What's the name again?" "Sneffels," Mr. Fredrickson replied calmly. "Yes, the volcano has been dead for the past 500 years. "Yes, what you have said has made me decide that we'll try to climb that Sneffels to study," my uncle responded with great excitement. "We'll take a boat across to get there. That's the quickest way." "It would be, but there are no boats in Rakiovic." "Not a single one?" "That's right. You'll have to go by land. It will be longer, but more interesting. I know someone who can guide you there." "A responsible, intelligent man?" "Yes, he lives nearby. He makes his living by hunting. You'll be pleased with him. He speaks Danish quite well." "When can I see him?" "Tomorrow, if you'd like." "Why not today?" "Because he won't be here till tomorrow." "Well, tomorrow then," my uncle said, looking disappointed. The conversation between the German professor and the Icelandic professor soon ended. My uncle was quite pleased with his findings. He had discovered the reason for the mysterious document and the story of Sacnussemm. Chapter 11. That evening I took a short walk around the city, came back early, and fell asleep. When I woke up, I heard my uncle talking in the next room. I quickly got up and went to join him. He was talking in Danish with a tall, muscular man who looked uncommonly strong. He had a big head and calm blue eyes with long red hair. He looked intelligent, but made very little movement. He never moved his arms while he spoke. He looked as if nothing could ever surprise or disturb him. I watched him as he watched my uncle speak with great excitement and movement. The Icelander sat silently listening. I was quite surprised to see that he was a hunter. He certainly would not scare away the animals he was hunting, but how would he get to them? Mr. Fridriksson then told me that this calm man was only a hunter of eider duck feathers. The eider is a rather pretty kind of duck with soft feathers. The island's main wealth came from the sale of eider feathers used to make thick blankets. In early summer, the female eider duck builds her nest near the coast. When the nest is finished, she fills it with feathers, which she pulls from the lower part of her body. Then the hunter comes and takes the nest. The female then begins building another one. This continues until she has no more feathers. Then the male takes his own feathers, but since his feathers are tough, they cannot be sold to make blankets, so this nest is not taken. The female lays her eggs in it, and the following year the hunter again returns to take the female eider's feathers. That quiet hunter, named Hans Bejelke, was now sitting with my uncle, ready to be our guide into the center of the earth. His behavior was quite different from my uncle's. Neither of them cared about money. No agreement on payment was ever easier. My uncle estimated that the trip would take us 7 or 8 days to journey to Sneffels. Hans would stay with us as long as we needed his help. He would receive 3 riksdaler a week, and would be paid every Saturday morning, something he considered to be important for his services. We were to leave on June 16th. My uncle offered to pay him in advance, but Hans refused with a single word. "Efter," he said. "After," my uncle translated for me. After the meeting was over, Hans left without another word. "He's an excellent man," my uncle said, "but he still has no idea of how his life will change after this experience with us." "Do you mean he'll come with us to—" "Yes, Axel, to the center of the earth." We still had 2 days before we would leave. To my disappointment, I was forced to spend my time preparing for our trip. Our last evening was spent with Mr. Fridriksson, who I had come to like very much. At 5 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of 4 horses, which we would use on our journey to Sneffels. By 6 o'clock, everything was ready. Mr. Fridriksson shook hands with us. My uncle thanked him warmly in Icelandic. Chapter 12. I was content to be riding on horseback through this interesting country. I began to feel that I could enjoy our journey. Anyway, I thought, what's so bad about traveling in a very interesting country, climbing a volcano, then going inside? Sacnussemm obviously did the same. As for going into the center of the earth, that's just impossibly. Hans was leading us, walking rapidly. He refused to ride on horseback, as he always went on foot. Behind him were my uncle and I, each on a horse, and 2 horses behind us carrying our baggage. Iceland is one of Europe's largest islands. It has an area of nearly 40,000 square miles, with a population of only 60,000 people. We were traveling southwest, where Sneffels was located. I was quite amused watching my uncle on his horse behind our calm guide. My uncle only had the choice to be patient, relying on our quiet guide to take us to the mountain, As we went, we saw a few cottages made of earth, but no one outside their homes to greet us. Yet this region of the country was the most populated. What, then, were the other parts like, the ones with even less people than this area? After traveling 2 hours outside the capital city, we stopped at a church to have a small breakfast. Hans politely answered my uncle's questions with yes or no. When asked where we would sleep that night, he replied with only Gardar. I looked at our map to see that Gardar was a village 18 miles from Rakiovic. I then showed it to my uncle. "Only 18 miles, he said. 18 miles out of 100. That's just a short walk. We could go at least 25 miles today." He began complaining to our guide, explaining that we could go a longer distance, but Hans did not respond. At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, we arrived in Gardar. Chapter 13. Ordinarily, it would have been dark by 6 o'clock in the evening. In Iceland, however, the sun never sets in June and July. There is always daylight, although the temperature was much colder than during the day. I was cold and hungry, so I was glad to see a villager welcome us into his home. It was a peasant's house, and he was eager to greet us. We followed him into the cottage and saw there were 4 rooms: the kitchen, the workroom, the family bedroom, and the guest room, the best room of all. I was quite disturbed with the strong smell of dried fish and sour milk that filled the house. The host called us into the kitchen and greeted us with the words "Salvertu," which means "be happy," and kissed us on the cheek. His wife greeted us in the same manner. We soon discovered that they had 19 children, all of whom had just entered the small kitchen. Soon enough, all 24 of us sat down at the table, many of the children sitting on our laps. When the soup arrived, however, the room was silent. We ate mushroom soup, then a great amount of dried fish with rotten butter, then had soured milk and bread. After dinner, the children ran off, and the hostess offered to take off our socks and pants, as was tradition for the hostess to do, but we politely declined. At 5 o'clock the next morning, we said goodbye to the Icelandic peasants and continued on our journey, after my uncle had insisted to pay the peasant for allowing us to stay in his home. We went deeper into the wilderness. Sometimes, however, we saw a human running away from us. I was shocked to see them hairless, with sores on their bodies. Hans would greet them as they ran away with "Salvertu," before turning to my uncle to say "Spitelsk." My uncle would then translate for me. A leper. Leprosy was a terrible disease, which was unfortunately common in Iceland. These poor humans were forbidden to marry. We were going through the wilderness of Iceland quite quickly. On Saturday, June 20th, at 6 o'clock in the evening, we reached a village where Hans's relatives lived. He asked for his wages. My uncle paid him. I hoped to stay for a short time to recover from our long journey, but my uncle insisted we leave early the next morning, as he felt nothing but eagerness and excitement for the adventure. After walking for 4 hours, we could see Sneffels in the distance. The professor could look at nothing else than this great mountain we would soon climb. Chapter 14. Sneffels was located in the small village of Stapi, with about 30 small cottages. The cottages were built on lava, a hard rock material that hardens after bursting out of a volcano as a fire-hot thick liquid called magma. I had never seen such an impressive structure, made entirely of lava over 500 years ago. My uncle decided that the day after arriving in Stapi, we would climb part of the way on the mountain, spending a few days there. After arriving in Stapi, my fears about the journey returned. I was worried that perhaps Sneffels was no longer a dead volcano. It could very possibly explode with fire-hot lava again, and we might be inside it during that time. I then spoke to my uncle about my fears. After a few moments of silent thinking, he said, "Yes, I've been thinking about that as well. Ever since we came to Stapi, I've been concerned with this serious question. Sneffels has been quiet for 600 years, but it may awake again. I've questioned the local people and studied the ground, and I can tell you, Axel, that there won't be an explosion." I was so shocked at such a confident statement that I could not respond. "You don't believe me? Then follow me and I will explain," my uncle said to me. He took me to a natural hot spring nearby. There was steam rising from the water. "You see that steam rising, Axel? They prove we have no reason to fear the volcano. When a volcano explosion is about to happen, that steam becomes more active, then disappears completely during the explosion because there's no more pressure coming from inside the earth to push the steam through the cracks in the earth. You can be certain there will not be an explosion in the near future. But enough. When science has spoken, there's nothing to reply." I said no more. My uncle had used a scientific explanation to win an argument. The next morning, June 23rd, Hans had found 2 other men to help us carry our baggage into the mountain. It was 9 in the morning. We left Stapi to go climbing Sneffels. Chapter 15. Sneffels is 5,000 feet high. We walked behind our silent guide up the mountain. Although I still had many worries about our journey, I took an interest in the rocks and lava we walked through. I looked at the lava and rocks carefully as we walked further up the side of the mountain. Many parts of Iceland are covered in hardened lava, as the island has a great deal of dead volcanoes, from which hot liquid magma burst out many years ago, which dried into strange, smooth-looking lava. As we climbed higher, our journey became more difficult. The mountain became steeper, and there were many more loose rocks, which made our walking quite dangerous. Hans moved calmly, as if he were on level ground. My uncle stayed close to me as much as possible. He was always watching to make sure I was nearby. His arm often gave me strong support. After several hours of climbing up the mountain, my uncle saw that I was becoming rather weak and asked Hans to stop. He refused, telling my uncle there was a terrible storm coming. He pointed into the distance, and I saw the storm approaching. We kept walking up, now quite quickly. Soon enough, the mountain shook as the storm crashed into the mountain. Luckily, our clever guide had led us around to the other side of the mountain. If we had climbed the mountain on the opposite side, where we came from, we would all have been taken up by the storm and would certainly be dead. Finally, just before midnight, we reached the top of Sneffels. Chapter 16. After a quick dinner, we settled down to sleep for the night. Surprisingly, I slept peacefully all night. It was one of the best nights I had spent in a long time. I didn't even dream. The next morning we awoke to a chilly air. we soon began making our way into the mountain's crater. We had to tie ourselves together for safety reasons. If one person fell as he was climbing down, he would be supported by the others. We arrived at the bottom of the crater at noon. I looked up and saw the opening and saw a small bit of sky looking perfectly circular. At the bottom of the crater, there were 3 openings to take us into the earth. 500 years ago, fire-hot magma had come through those holes. Sacnussemm had used the July sun to determine which hole to go into, as we would now do as well. Each of these holes was about 100 feet wide. I didn't have the courage to look into any of the mysterious holes. My uncle, however, had already examined them and continued running back and forth to make calculations about how we would enter one of them. Hans and his friends sat down and watched him, obviously viewing him as a madman. Suddenly my uncle cried out and immediately called me to him. "Axel! Axel!" he shouted. "Come here! Come here!" I ran to him. Hans and his friends didn't move. "Look," the professor said to me. I then understood the reason for his great shock and amazement. I looked down at a large piece of lava in the middle of the crater. I read, on the west side of the rock, in ancient Icelandic characters, the name Arni Sacnussemm. "Arni Sacnussemm," my uncle said. "Now, do you have any doubts?" Without answering, I went back to sit down, overwhelmed by this new finding. I don't know how long I sat there thinking, but when I finally looked up, I saw only my uncle and Hans on the bottom of the crater. Hans's Icelandic friends had been dismissed and had already climbed up the inside of Sneffels to return home. Hans was sleeping peacefully nearby, while my uncle was nervously walking around the crater, making arrangements for our continuing journey. I decided to go to sleep for the night, but I slept terribly, constantly hearing terrible noises or felt movements within the mountain, and that was how we spent our first night in the crater. The next morning we awoke to a gray, cloudy sky, which greatly upset my uncle. He knew we could not enter the earth, as we needed the July sun to show a shadow on one of the 3 holes in the crater. That was the hole we had to enter, just as Arni Sacnussemm had before us. The day went by and still no shadow appeared. On June 26th, still no shadow. Hans built a small hut, using bits of lava. My uncle was becoming more impatient. The next day the sky was still cloudy, but on Sunday, June 28th, 2 days from the end of the month, sunlight came into the crater. My uncle waited with excitement until noon, when the sun would be directly above us. We then discovered that we would go through the middle hole. "There it is! There it is!" he cried. "Let's go into the center of the earth," he added in Danish. I looked at Hans. "Forut," he said calmly. "Forward," my uncle translated for me. It was 13 minutes past 1. Chapter 17. The real journey was beginning. So far, we had to deal with being tired more than with difficulties. But now we were going to see many more difficulties. I hadn't yet looked down into the hole I was climbing into. I could still refuse to go any farther, but I would have been ashamed in front of Hans. He accepted the adventure so calmly, disregarding all danger. If I had been alone with my uncle, I would have given him several arguments as to why we should not go any farther, but as Hans was with us, I said nothing. I thought of my lovely Grauben and stepped into the hole. I looked down and saw that the walls were almost vertical, but there were rocks sticking out from the walls, which we would use to climb down. "Now," my uncle said when he had finished his preparations, "let's take care of the baggage. We'll divide it into 3 bundles, and each of us will carry one on his back. I'm only talking about the measuring instruments, tools, and some food. Hans," he continued, "will take the tools and 1/3 of the food. You, Axel, will take the guns and another 1/3 of the food. I'll take the rest of it and the breakable instruments." "But what about the clothes and our other tools?" I asked. "Who will take them down?" "They'll go down by themselves," he answered. "How?" "You'll see." Hans then tied the rest of our things together and threw them down the hole. My uncle watched with satisfaction as he watched our things drop into the hole. "Good," he said. "Now we must go down." Is it possible to listen to those words without fear? We prepared to climb down into the earth. Hans went first, then my uncle and I followed. We were silent, but at times heard loose rocks fall. We were tied together and tied the rope to rocks as we went down to be safe. "Gif acht," I heard Hans say as we went down. "Be careful," my uncle would translate for me. After going down for an hour, I still could not see the bottom of the hole. Although I have a great interest in studying the earth's surface and rocks, I was paying no attention as we climbed down, feeling nothing but fear as we went farther into the earth. The professor, however, was making observations or taking notes as we went down. "Axel," he said to me, "the farther down we go, the more confident I feel that the inside of the earth is not too hot. The groupings of those volcanic rocks tell me that there has been water here. I must believe that there is not heat at the earth's center, but we shall soon see for ourselves." After another 3 hours, I still couldn't see the bottom. Each time I looked down, I saw the hole get smaller. 10 hours later, I still could not see the bottom, although we had gone down nearly 2,800 feet. Soon after coming to this conclusion, Hans told us to stop. "We've arrived," said my uncle. "Where?" I asked. "At the bottom of the hole." "Is there another opening?" I asked, looking around into the darkness. "Yes, I can see a passageway off to the right. We'll look into that tomorrow. First, we'll have dinner and then we'll sleep." We had some food, then got ready to sleep. Looking up, I saw a bright spot overhead. It was a star in the sky. I then fell asleep. Chapter 18. At 8 in the morning, I saw sunlight above us. The light was bright enough so we could see around us. "Well, Axel, what do you think of this?" my uncle asked. "What a peaceful night of sleep we have had." "Yes, it's quiet at the bottom of this hole," I said, "but there is something frightening about such quietness." "If you're frightened already, how worried will you be later on? We haven't even gone into the earth yet." "What do you mean?" "I mean that we've only reached the surface of the island. Remember we climbed the mountain of Sneffels first, then we climbed down again, but inside." "Are you sure?" "Yes. Look at this instrument that I've brought. It measures how far into the earth we've gone. We're only at the level of the sea now. We haven't gone into the earth yet." But, I said, won't the increasing pressure be painful for us the deeper we go? No, we'll go down slowly, so we get used to breathing the air under pressure. We had some breakfast and packed our things while my uncle made more calculations about how we would go into the earth. Now, we're really going down into the earth. This is the exact time when our journey begins, my uncle told me with a smile. The three of us then picked up our lanterns to guide us in the darkness. Let's go, my uncle said. Each of us picked up our things and began walking. I looked one last time at the Icelandic sky, which I would never see again. During the last volcanic explosion of Sneffels in 1229, lava had come through this passageway. I saw the lava on the walls, which was thick and shiny. As we walked, we had to go slowly or we would fall and slide down the passageway. Luckily, there were rocks coming out from the walls that we could use as steps. It was as if we were walking down a steep hill and had to walk slowly. At some points, usually above us, I could see the lava had turned into crystals hanging down. It's amazing, I cried out. Uncle, look at how the lava turns from reddish-brown to bright yellow. It's incredible. And look at those crystals shining above us. Ha! You're beginning to open your eyes, Axel, my uncle replied. You'll see even better sights further on. Just keep walking. Our instrument, showing our direction, called the compass, pointed southeast. As we walked, the temperature hadn't risen too much. I was quite surprised. 2 hours after we began walking into the earth, the temperature was still 50 degrees, increased only 7 degrees, which made me think we were walking more horizontally near the earth's surface than vertically toward the center of the earth. At about 8 o'clock that evening, my uncle decided we should stop. Hans immediately sat down. I was surprised to feel a light wind pass by, but after walking for the past 7 hours, I was too tired and hungry to wonder about the mysterious wind. We sat down and ate together. I was worried, however, that we would soon run out of water, as half our supply was gone. My uncle expected that we would find underground rivers to fill our bottles, but we had not found any. "You're surprised that we haven't found any water yet?" he asked. "Yes, and worried, too. We only have enough water for 5 days. "Don't worry, Axel. I promise you that we'll find water, even more than we need." "When?" "When we finish walking through this passageway. Water could never go through these thick walls of lava." "But we haven't gone too far vertically. It seems that we've walked more horizontally than vertically," I explained to my uncle. "Why do you think so?" "Because the temperature would be higher than it is now if we'd gone far into the earth." "What is the temperature now?" my uncle asked me with a smile. "It's 59 degrees, I answered, which means that it's gone up only 16 degrees since we started. The temperature inside the earth should increase by 1 degree for every 40 feet deeper into the earth. But that calculation can change at different places on the earth. I calculate that we've only gone around 640 feet into the earth." "Well," my uncle said, "I have calculated that we've gone nearly 10,000 feet into the earth." "That's impossible." "Not at all." The professor was correct. The temperature now should have been 186 degrees, but it was actually only 59. This eased some of my worries. Chapter 19. At 6 o'clock the next morning, Tuesday, June 30th, we continued our journey into the earth. We were still following the passage until 17 minutes past noon. "Ah!" my uncle exclaimed. "We've come to the end of the passageway." I looked around to see that there were now 2 passageways we could take. Which one should we take? It was a difficult decision. My uncle, however, decided we should go into the eastern passage, and we were soon inside it. My uncle had to guess, as there was no reason for choosing one or the other. The downward walk was still gentle. The temperature was still bearable. As we walked, I often thought of how unbearably hot that passage must have been as lava went through on its way to Sneffels, where it would burst out the top. Now, however, it was so calm and quiet. I only hope, I thought, that the old volcano doesn't decide to awake again after all this time. I didn't tell my uncle about my fears. He wouldn't have understood them. He only had one idea: to keep going forward. He was determined to continue. By 6 o'clock in the evening, after a day of walking that hadn't been too difficult, we had gone 5 miles south, but only a quarter of a mile down towards the center of the earth. My uncle decided that we would stop to sleep. We ate without talking, then went to sleep without thinking too much. We woke up the next morning ready to continue on our journey. We continued to follow the same path, although I noticed that at 10 in the morning our path began going upward. The walk became so tiring that I had to walk slower. "What's wrong, Axel?" the professor asked impatiently. "What's wrong is that I'm tired," I answered. "What? You're tired after 3 hours of walking on such an easy path?" "It's not that easy. It's tiring." "Tiring? When all we have to do is go down." "Go down? I believe we're going up." "Up?" my uncle said. "That's right. The path changed half an hour ago, and I believe we'll soon come back to the surface of Iceland." The professor still could not believe me. My uncle said nothing more, and we began walking again. I was determined to walk faster, with my uncle and Hans, our fearless leader. Although walking upward was more difficult, I was content that we were getting closer to the surface of the earth. I decided that I must walk quickly to stay with Hans and my uncle, as I greatly feared being alone in that frightening passageway. At noon, I noticed that the rock that covered the walls was no longer lava, but a rock type that was found in England in ancient times, during a time when the first plants and animals appeared on Earth. I mentioned my discovery to my uncle, who didn't seem to share my excitement. Perhaps he was upset that he had chosen the Eastern Passage, or was he determined to explore the passageway farther? It was clear that this path would not take us into the earth, but would only take us closer to the earth. Perhaps, however, I was wrong myself. If I'm right, I thought, I'll find some ancient plants that will show my uncle that I'm correct. I'll keep looking. I had walked another 100 steps when I found such a plant. I had stepped on dried pieces of an ancient plant. Professor Lidenbrock would, of course, recognize them. He refused to look at the plant, however, continuing on his journey through the passage. I could not bear this any longer. I picked up the remains of an animal that lived on the earth thousands of years ago. "Look at this," I said to my uncle. "Well," he said, "it's the remains of an ancient animal that lived thousands of years ago. That's all." "But doesn't it mean that we—" "Yes, perhaps I've chosen the wrong passage, and we're going back up to the surface of the earth. But I won't be sure I made a mistake till I reach the end of this passage." "You're right, Uncle. I would agree with you if we weren't running out of water. Well, then, Axel, we'll have to drink less water. We must be careful about saving the water. Chapter 20. We did indeed have to save our water. Our water couldn't last more than 3 days, as I realized that evening at supper. We had very little hope of finding an underground river in that area. All throughout the next day, we continued to walk up that passage. My uncle and I spoke very little. Hans said nothing. We continued in this way for quite some time. My uncle was waiting for one of two things to happen. Either we would come to a vertical path that would take us down again into the earth, or we would come to the end of the passageway, which would force us to go back. We went on till evening without finding either. On Friday, after a night of terrible thirst, we again continued on our walk through the passage. After 10 hours of walking, I noticed the walls had changed from the weak stones and sand to a black material. I put my hand up to the wall, then noticed that my hand was now black. I looked closely at the wall and discovered that we were surrounded by coal. "A coal mine!" I exclaimed. "A mine without human miners," my uncle said. "Oh, no miners?" "I know there are no miners. I'm certain that humans didn't make this passage through coal, but I don't really care whether nature made it or humans. Let's eat dinner." Hans prepared the food. I ate very little, but I drank the little water I was allowed to drink. Hans's bottle was half full. That was all the water we had left. After our meal, we all settled in to go to sleep. But I couldn't sleep, and so I waited till the morning came. On Saturday at 6 o'clock we left. 20 minutes later, we came to a cave that could not have been man-made. If it had been, the ceiling would have been straight. It was the mysteries of nature that kept the ceiling up. The cave was about 100 feet wide and 150 feet high. Looking at the walls, I could see different periods during the earth's development. In the walls, I saw the different layers of rock and sand that were pressed together to produce the coal. During this time, the surface of the earth was covered in plant life because the center of the earth at that time was so hot that it warmed the surface. Because of the heat, the air was thick and wet, which surrounded the earth, which kept the surface of the earth from receiving any sunlight. The climate around the earth was the same everywhere, hot and wet. Where did the heat come from? Inside the earth. Although my uncle disagrees with me, I believe there was a great deal of fire deep within the earth during this time, which heated even the surface of the earth. The plants on the surface were covered in water, and had no flowers or smells because they did not receive the sun's light. But their roots were strong, fed by the hot earth of that time. During this time, the inside of the earth, filled with a hot liquid, moved around a great deal, which produced changes throughout the rest of the earth as well. With the great movements within the earth, plants that were under the earth's surface changed first into soil, then into coal with the strong heat. Thus the many coal beds that were under the earth's surface were formed. Although there are many coal beds around the earth, there will be no more within 3 centuries, unless the nations of the world greatly reduce their use of coal. This coal bed will probably never be used by humans, as it is so deep in the earth. Taking coal from such a deep place would be too costly. Besides, there are still other coal beds closer to the surface of the earth. So this coal bed will remain the same until the end of the world. The temperature was still about the same after we passed the lava walls, but then I began to smell a gas that explodes when exposed to fire. I remembered hearing stories of terrible explosions in coal mines because of the exploding gas, always present in coal mines. We were fortunate to bring electric lanterns instead of fire-burning ones. If we had been foolish enough to bring fire-burning lanterns, we would have died in a terrible explosion. We continued through the coal bed till the evening. My uncle was quite impatient with the passage continuing to be horizontal. I was beginning to think we would never come to an end, when, at 6 o'clock, a wall suddenly appeared in front of us. We had come to a dead end. "Well, this is better," my uncle said. "At least we know where the passage goes. We're not following Sacnussem's way, and now we have to turn back. We'll sleep tonight, and then within 3 days we'll be back to where the other passageway is." "Yes," I said, "if we have the strength to get there." "Why shouldn't we?" "Because by tomorrow we'll be completely out of water." "And will we have no courage either?" the professor asked, looking seriously at me. I knew I should say nothing. Chapter 21. We started our return early the next morning. We had to hurry. We were a 3 days' walk from the entrance to this passage. Our return was difficult. My uncle was angry at losing so much time. Hans was calm, and I complained and worried that we would soon be dead. As I expected, we ran out of water at the end of the first day. The heat was almost unbearable, and I was so tired that I could hardly move. Finally, on Tuesday, July 7th, hardly able to walk, we arrived at the entrance to the passage. It was 10 in the morning. Hans and my uncle sat against the wall and tried to eat a few small bites of food. After a short time, my uncle came over to me, holding my head in his arms. "Poor boy," he whispered, pitying me. I looked up into his face and saw that tears filled his eyes. Then I saw him take a bottle hanging at his side. To my shock, he held the bottle to my lips. "Drink," he said. I took only one drink, but that was enough to give me life. I thanked him. "Yes," he said, "a drink of water. The last one, do you hear? The last one." I kept it, although many times I wanted to take it. Axel, I kept it for you. "Uncle," I whispered with tears in my eyes. "Yes, my boy. I knew when you arrived here you would need it to stay alive." "Thank you," I cried. "Thank you." I was still quite thirsty, but that drink of water had given me back some of my strength. "We must go back up to Sneffels," I continued. "So, Axel," my uncle said after a long silence, "that drink of water didn't give you back your courage and determination." "What? Do you mean that you refuse to give up this journey when we can surely succeed? Never." "Then we must realize that we will soon die." "No, Axel, no. Go back. I don't want you to die. Hans can go with you. Leave me here alone." "You want me to leave you?" "Yes, leave me. I began this journey, and I'll either finish it or never come back. Leave me, Axel." I didn't want to leave my uncle at the bottom of that hole, but I still wanted to leave. Hans watched us with his usual calm silence, but he understood what was happening. He was ready to leave if he was told to do so, or to stay if my uncle requested. I wished I could speak to him to make him understand. I would explain the terrible dangers for us if we continued on this journey. Perhaps we could both have persuaded my uncle not to continue. I walked over to Hans, took his hand, and pointed to the passageway returning to Sneffels. He calmly pointed to my uncle and spoke. "Master," he said. "Your master?" I cried. You're crazy. He's not the master of your life. We must return. He must come with us. Do you hear me? Do you understand?" Still, he said nothing. My uncle then began speaking to me. "Calm down, Axel," he told me. "Listen to my idea," he began. "Our lack of water is our only problem right now. In the eastern passage, which goes up to the earth, we found no water, but the western passage should go down towards the earth. While you were lying there, I went to look at the passage. It goes down, and it will take us through a passageway with walls of rock which support rivers and lakes. I suggest that we go into the passage for one more day. If by then we haven't found water, we'll return to the surface." Although I still wanted only to return to Sneffels immediately, I agreed to my uncle's suggestion. Chapter 22. We began walking down again, this time along a new passage. Hans was in front as usual. I noticed that there were many cracks in the rocks that formed the walls of the passageway. During the period after the earth was heated by the center of the earth, it cooled a great deal, which produced this wall to crack in many places as it quickly cooled. As we examined the wall, filled with different types of rock and showing bits of gold and other metals, it was now 8 in the evening. We still had no water. I was suffering horribly. My uncle walked on, refusing to hear my complaints. My legs were becoming quite weak. Finally, I lost all strength and cried out as I fell to the ground. "Help! I'm dying!" My uncle came back, looked at me, then said, "It's all over," quietly before I fell asleep. When I opened my eyes again, Hans and my uncle were asleep. I couldn't fall asleep again. I was in too much pain. I worried that I would not survive this journey. I did not know how I would be able to return to the surface of Sneffels. We were 4 miles under the earth. A few hours went by. There was a deep silence, the silence of death. No sound could come through those walls, which were at least 4 miles thick. Then I heard a sound. I looked closer and saw Hans leaving with one of the lanterns. Why was he leaving us? But then I was ashamed to realize that he was going deeper into the passage. Had he gone to find something he had heard? Why did he leave? Chapter 23. For an hour I thought of several reasons for Hans to leave alone down the passage during the night. But finally I heard him return. He went over to my uncle, put his hand on his shoulder, and gently woke him. My uncle stood up. "What is it?" my uncle asked. "Warten," Hans replied. "Water," my uncle said, quite shocked at what he heard. "Water! Water!" I cried as I jumped up. We prepared to leave immediately. Soon we were walking along the passage again. Half an hour later, we had walked about 6,000 feet and gone down 2,000 feet. At that moment we heard the sound of water nearby. "Hans wasn't mistaken," said my uncle. "There must be an underground river nearby." We walked more quickly. I no longer felt tired. The sound of running water became louder as we walked deeper. Another half an hour went by, and we walked another 1.25 miles. Hans had obviously not gone farther than this, as he had heard the water but did not actually find it. We soon realized that we had begun moving away from the river, since the sound was becoming weaker. We turned back. Hans stopped at the place where the river seemed nearest. The water was behind one of the walls, but we were separated from the water by the thick wall made of rock. I then lost my hope of finding water. Hans then looked at me, and I thought I saw him smile. He took his lantern and walked to the wall, putting his ear close to it. He was listening for the strongest point of the running water. He then picked up one of the tools and began swinging it into the wall to make a small hole where the water could escape. "Saved!" I cried. "Yes, Hans is right," my uncle said with excitement. "What a clever man he is!" But what if rock flew at us, crushing us? What if the river burst through the wall and killed us? These were terrible fears, but nothing could keep us from our desire to drink water. Hans then began swinging the tool at the wall. He calmly swung at the same place repeatedly. After more than an hour, Hans had made a hole 2 feet deep. My uncle offered to help, and just as he took the tool, we heard the water burst through the wall. The spray of water was strong and almost knocked Hans over. He then cried out in pain. I then touched the water and felt the pain myself. "This water's boiling hot!" I shouted. "Well, it will cool down," my uncle replied. After a short time, the water did indeed cool, and we drank some. What unbelievable pleasure! What kind of water was this? Where did it come from? I did not care. It saved me from death in that terrible passageway. After a minute of enjoying this new treasure, I exclaimed, "There's iron in this water." "Then it's excellent for the stomach," my uncle said, "and it must have other good minerals as well." "Oh, it's so good!" "Of course, it's water from several miles underground. What a wonderful thing Hans has done for us. I must suggest that we name this stream after him." "Yes," I agreed. And so the stream that now flowed down the passage from the hole in the wall was named Hansbach. "Now," I said, "we must fill this hole so the water does not all escape." "Why?" my uncle asked. "I'm sure the river will never end." "We should still fill our bottles, then try to stop the opening." We then tried to repair the hole, but just burned our fingers. There was too much pressure, and we soon gave up. Then my uncle had an idea. "Why should we close the opening?" he asked. "Later on, when our bottles are empty again, we cannot be sure that we'll find another river. We should let this stream continue. It will run downward, so it will guide us as well." "What a clever idea," I said. "With this stream, we will surely be able to continue our journey to the end." "You're beginning to understand, my boy," the professor said, laughing. By that time it was late in the night. After eating, we were soon asleep and satisfied. Chapter 24. The next morning, we had already forgotten our past sufferings. At first, I was surprised to find that I wasn't thirsty. We had breakfast and drank some more iron-filled water. I was now determined to go far. I was confident that my uncle would achieve his goal of going to the center of the earth. If anyone had suggested that I go back to the top of Sneffels, I would have angrily refused. "Let's go," I called to Hans and my uncle. It was 8 o'clock on Thursday morning when we began walking. We were walking southeast. My uncle kept looking at his instruments, showing our direction very carefully to remember how we had come. The passage was now almost horizontal. My uncle was becoming quite upset as we continued to walk horizontally without going deeper into the earth. On Friday evening, July 10th, we figured that we were now 75 miles southeast of Rakiovic and 6¼ miles down. Then we suddenly saw a steep drop in the path, going almost straight down. My uncle was delighted to see the change in the path. "This will take us far and easily," he said, "because the rocks sticking out from the wall make stairs for us to climb down." We then began our climb down. This passageway was only a large crack in the earth, which was produced while the Earth was cooling after the long period of time when the fire from the inside of the Earth heated the surface. On July 11th and 12th, we continued down the passage. We went 5 miles deeper into the Earth. We were now about 12 miles below sea level. But on July 13th at noon, the passage was a great deal more horizontal, and we were easily about to walk down the passageway, still going deep into the Earth. On Wednesday, July 15th, we were more than 17 miles underground and about 125 miles from Sneffels. Although we were tired, we were still healthy. Every hour my uncle made his calculations about how far we had walked, the temperature, and the pressure. When he told me we had gone 125 miles, I realized we were no longer under Iceland. I looked at the map and discovered that we were now under the sea. "Under the sea?" my uncle said. "So the ocean is over our heads," I exclaimed. "Of course, Axel. What's wrong with that? There are coal mines around the world that are under the sea." The professor did not seem worried about our situation, but I still had many fears. 4 days later, on the evening of Saturday, July 18th, we came to a large cave. My uncle paid Hans his weekly salary, and we decided we would all rest the next day. Chapter 25. I woke up on Sunday morning without getting ready quickly, and felt quite content. I had become used to living under the earth. I rarely thought of the sun, the stars, the moon, trees, houses, cities. I was now living in the ancient past, seeing animals and rocks of thousands of years ago. After breakfast, the professor decided to organize his notes from the journey. "First," he said, "I'm going to calculate where we are exactly. When we return to the surface, I want to be able to draw a map of our journey into the earth." "That will be very interesting, Uncle. But are your calculations correct? So you will be able to draw a map?" "Yes. I've carefully noted every change in the passageways we've taken. I'm sure I haven't made a mistake." After many calculations, he announced, "We've come 212 miles from Sneffels. So, we're traveling under the ocean." "That's right," my uncle said confidently. "So, there may be terrible storms above us now." "Perhaps, but don't worry, Axel. Those storms can't harm us down here. We're 40 miles under the surface of the earth." 40 miles, I exclaimed. "Yes. But many scientists believe that 40 miles is the thickness of the earth. And many still believe that at this depth, the temperature should be nearly 3,000 degrees. "Should be, but we both know it is not. The temperature is still only 81.1 degrees. So the scientists are wrong by almost 3,000 degrees. But, Uncle, I have a question. The distance between the surface and the center of the earth is nearly 3,958 miles, or almost 4,000 miles. But we've only gone 40 miles down and 212 miles horizontally in about 20 days. "Yes, in 20 days. Since 40 miles is 1/100th of the distance to the center of the earth, it will take us about 2,000 days, or nearly 5.5 years, to reach the center." The professor was silent. "Besides," I continued, "if we continue to go 200 miles horizontally, for every 40 miles we go down, we'll end our journey at the surface of the earth long before we get to the center." "Your calculations are foolish," my uncle said to me angrily. "How do you know this passage doesn't go straight to the center? Someone else, Arne Sacnussemm, has already done this, and I'll succeed just as he did." "I hope so, but—" You should be quiet, Axel. Stop talking like a fool. I was silent. The rest of the day was spent in calculations and conversation. I agreed with Professor Lidenbrock on everything else he said that day, and I envied Hans for his unchanging calm. Chapter 26. Thus far, things have gone well, and I had no reason to complain. If we had no further difficulties, we could have easily achieved our goal. I had begun thinking like my uncle, seriously. For several days we were on a steeper path, at times quite steep. That, in fact, took us down much faster than we liked. There were days when we moved 4 or 5 miles closer to the center of the earth. Hans's great mountain climbing skills led us safely down the path. The calm, quiet Icelander had saved our lives more than once. We would not have survived this journey without him. Hans continued with his silence, and we too became much more silent. After 2 weeks, we had no surprising incidents, except one that I will never be able to forget. By August 7th, we had gone 75 miles into the earth. We were nearly 500 miles from Iceland. On that day, the passage was easy to walk. The pass was slightly downward. I was walking in front when I looked back and saw that I was alone. I've been walking too fast, I thought, or else Hans and my uncle have stopped. I'd better go back to them. I walked back for a quarter of an hour. I heard nothing. I began to worry, but decided that I must be calm. I walked half an hour longer. I listened for their voices, but still heard nothing. Then I stopped. I couldn't believe I was alone. I was afraid I had become lost. Look, I told myself, there's only one path, and they're following it, so I can't miss them. All I have to do is keep going toward them. I'll find them. I was then full of doubt. Was I really walking in front? Yes, I remembered that Hans was behind me and my uncle was behind him. I have no reason to worry. I have the stream to guide me to them. If I just follow it back in the direction it's coming from, I will surely find my uncle and Hans. I felt more confident now. I secretly thanked my uncle for not repairing the hole in the wall, allowing the little stream to flow out. I bent down to wash my hands in the water, but was shocked to find that the Hansbach stream was gone. The stream was no more. Chapter 27. I can't explain how terrified I became. I touched the ground again, but felt no water, only dry rock. How had I left the stream? Now I realized why there was such a deep silence. When I first took the wrong way, I hadn't noticed that the stream had disappeared. I had taken one passage, while the stream, my uncle, and Hans had taken the other. How could I get back to it? There was no trail to follow. I did not remember from which way I had come. I was lost. Yes, I was lost many miles under the surface of the earth. I tried to remember my life on the surface of the earth. I remembered Hamburg, my uncle's little house, and my poor Grauben. I then remembered the beginning of this journey, the ship, Iceland, the Icelandic scientist, Sneffels. I would never see the surface of the earth again, I worried. "Oh, Uncle!" I cried out. Those were the only words I could say because I realized that my poor uncle must have been suffering as he looked for me. I then remembered that I had food for 3 days and my water bottle was full. They would soon find me, but should I go up or down? Up, of course, always up. I would surely arrive at the opening where the 2 passages meet. Then I would follow the stream up and go back to Sneffels. I then stood up and began walking up the passage. The path was now quite steep as I walked upward. I walked with hope, as I had nothing else to help me. For half an hour I walked, trying to recognize the passage as I walked through, but it didn't look familiar. Soon enough, I came to the end of the passage. It was a dead end. I sat down, filled with terror and doubt. I was now hopeless. I realized I was now going to die, 75 miles under the earth. I realized, as I lost hope, that if humans ever arrived here, 75 miles under the earth, my presence would be quite a mystery. I then realized that my lantern had been damaged when I fell, and I could not repair it. The light would soon go out, and I would be able to see nothing. I watched the light go out, thinking it would be the last light I would ever see. On the surface of the earth, there is always at least a little light, but here there was nothing. I was now in complete darkness. I then stood up and began running in that mysterious passage, always going downward. I called out to my uncle and Hans, shouting as I ran, often bumping into rocks, coming out from the wall, blood running down my face. After running for several hours, I fell next to the wall of the passage and fell asleep. Chapter 28. When I woke up, my face was wet with tears. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I know that no one has ever been as lonely as I was in that passage. After I fell, I had lost a great deal of blood, which I was now covered in. Oh, how I regretted that I hadn't died, and that I still had to wait for death to come. I sat down again and fell asleep, believing that I would soon be dead. Just then I heard the sound of an ocean. But where did the sound come from? I continued to listen. I wanted to hear the sound again. I listened for a quarter of an hour, but heard nothing. As I sat there listening, I thought I heard the sound of human voices. I must be dreaming, I thought. But no, I was awake and heard the voices again. Yes, I said aloud. Someone's talking. There's no doubt of it. When I moved farther down the wall, the voices became louder. Help! I shouted as loudly as I could. Help! I listened in the darkness to hear an answer, but heard nothing. Several minutes went by. I'm not hearing those voices through the rock. The walls are made of thick rock. That sound is coming to me along the passage. There must be some kind of special way for the sound to travel through the way the walls have been formed. I continued to listen, and this time I heard my own name being spoken. It was my uncle. Now I understood. I had to speak next to the wall to be heard. I had to speak quickly. If they moved only a few steps away from the wall, they would no longer be able to hear me. Uncle Otto! I said loudly. I waited anxiously. Sound doesn't travel very fast, particularly when under pressure, although it will improve the sound. A few seconds later, I heard these words. Axel! Axel, is that you? Yes, I answered. Where are you, my boy? Lost in the darkness. Where is your lantern? It's broken. Where is the stream? It's disappeared. Axel, my poor Axel, don't lose your courage. Wait for a while. I don't have the strength to talk right now, but talk to me. Be brave, my boy. Don't talk. Just listen. We went up and down the passage looking for you, but we could not find you. I cried for you, my boy. Finally, we thought that you might be further along, down with the stream, so we followed it down, firing the gun at times. Now, although we can hear each other, it's only because of the wall's special effect. Don't worry, though, Axel." As my uncle spoke, I realized that if we were going to meet again, we must know how far apart we were. "Uncle Otto, we must first know how far apart we are. Use your watch to measure how long it takes for me to hear your voice. When I hear it, I'll respond." "Yes, and half the time between the moment when I speak and the moment when I hear your answer will be the time it takes for my voice to reach you." "That's right." I put my ear to the wall to listen for him to speak. I heard the word "Axel" and repeated it, then waited. 40 seconds, my uncle said. "So the sound takes 20 seconds in each direction. Sound travels at 1,080 feet per second. You are 21,600 feet away from us, or a little over 4 miles. 4 miles? Yes, but you can find your way. Start walking downward because we've come to a place where there are many passages. The one you've been following will surely bring you to us. So stand up and begin walking. You'll find us waiting here to welcome you. Come, my boy." I was filled with courage at hearing these words. "Goodbye, Uncle," I called to him. "I'm starting to walk now." "Goodbye, Axel. We'll see you soon." Those were the last words I heard. That incredible conversation, 4 miles apart, ended with words of hope. I began walking downward, but soon the path was too steep. I began sliding down. I then began falling, as the passage was now vertical. I hit my head on a rock sticking out of the wall and passed out. Chapter 29. When I woke up, I was lying on thick blankets. My uncle was watching over me. He then took my hand and shouted for joy. "He's alive! He's alive!" "Yes," I said weakly. "You're saved, my dear boy," my uncle said, holding me in his arms. I was overjoyed to be with my uncle again. Just then Hans arrived. I saw a smile on his face. "God dog," he said. "Good day, Hans, good day," I said. "Now, Uncle, where are we?" "Tomorrow, Axel. I'll tell you tomorrow. Right now you must rest. Go to sleep, my boy, and tomorrow I'll tell you everything. Please, at least tell me what time it is and what day." "It's 11 o'clock at night on Sunday, August 9th. I really was very weak still. I needed a good night's rest. I went to sleep after discovering that I had been alone in the dark passage for 3 long days. When I woke up the next morning, I saw that my uncle and Hans had given me all the blankets we had brought. It was only half dark, but none of the lanterns were being used. I could not explain where the light came from. I then heard the sound of the ocean again. I wondered if, perhaps, I was dreaming. But no, I was not. That's really daylight coming through the rock. And I really hear the sound of the ocean. Are we still inside the earth, or has my uncle had us return to the surface? Just then my uncle came over to me and said cheerfully, "Good morning, Axel. I believe you're feeling well again." "Yes, I am," I said, sitting up. "I thought so, since you slept so well. Hans watched over you for part of the night, and I watched over you for the other part. We could actually see you getting better." "It's true. I feel much better again. So let's eat breakfast." "Don't worry. You'll have something to eat. You no longer have a fever. Hans put some secret Icelandic medicine on your wounds, and they're already gone. He's a good man." He was preparing breakfast as he spoke. I ate quickly and asked him many questions as I ate. I discovered that I had fallen into a deep hole, and I had landed in my uncle's arms, who rescued me from the falling rocks. "It's amazing that you weren't killed by those falling rocks," my uncle told me. "Now, let's not get separated again for the rest of the journey." I looked at him with great surprise. "What's the matter, Axel?" "So our trip is not over?" "Of course not," my uncle responded. "Are you sure there is nothing wrong with my head? You say that I am quite healthy now, but I believe there is something wrong in my brain." "Why?" "Because I see daylight and hear the sound of an ocean." "Oh, you'll see that tomorrow. I want you to rest today. The wind is far too strong for you today. You'll rest today, then we'll sail across the water tomorrow." Sail? I was too curious to wait till the next day to see this mysterious place. I wrapped myself in a blanket, and my uncle took me to see it. Chapter 30. "The sea!" I exclaimed. "Yes, the Lidenbrock Sea," my uncle said. "Since I am surely the first explorer to find it, it should be named after myself." It was either a large lake or an ocean I was standing next to. I saw no end to the great body of water. I was standing on the beach filled with golden sand. It looked incredibly like the oceans on the surface of the earth, but was deserted and wild-looking. There was an electric light filling the area. It was brighter than the light of the moon, but was not similar to sunlight. The ceiling or the sky over the ocean seemed to be made of big clouds moving overhead, from which rain would fall at times. I could not see over the clouds, but I imagined there to be a ceiling made of thick rock. The clouds seemed to be nearly 12,000 feet high, higher than clouds above the surface of the earth, probably because the air at the center of the earth was much thicker than that on the surface. I looked at this new place with amazement and fear. After walking through passageways for the last 47 days, I was delighted to breathe that air. "Do you feel strong enough to walk for a while?" my uncle asked. "Yes, of course," I answered. "Let's go to the shore then, Axel," he said. I walked eagerly. As I looked around, I saw the Hansbach stream flow from one of the passageways into the sea. "We'll miss that stream," I said quietly. "Why? It doesn't matter now if we have that stream or another one." I was surprised at my uncle's ungrateful comment, as that stream had saved our lives. But then I saw something else amazing. 1,500 feet away, I saw a thick forest. I walked quickly and was surprised to see plant types that I could recognize, but were much taller and thicker than those on the surface of the earth. "It's only a forest of mushrooms," my uncle said. He was right. But these plants, which lived well in warm, moist climates, had developed into the size of trees on the surface of the earth. These white mushrooms were 30 or 40 feet tall. There were thousands of them. We walked closer and saw there were other types of plants that were green on the surface, exposed to sunlight, but were colorless in this mysterious forest. Among these plants, I noticed trees that had not lived on the surface of the earth for thousands of years, but were at the center of the earth. I then noticed the bones of animals that had lived on the surface of the earth thousands of years ago as well. I realized that such animals could still be alive in that mysterious forest. I became quite worried as I looked around, but saw nothing except the sea and the forest. After walking around this mysterious land for a bit longer, we returned to our things. I went to sleep with strange thoughts in my mind, determined to cross that mysterious sea. Chapter 31. The next day I woke up completely well. I decided that I would go for a swim in the Lidenbrock Sea. I came back for breakfast quite hungry. Hans had prepared our meal. The three of us then went back to the sea to watch the changes in the sea. Uncle, where are we now? I haven't asked you for quite some time. Horizontally, we're 875 miles from Iceland and 88 miles under the surface. Then we're under Scotland now, under an area covered by mountains. This sky is holding up mountains, I said, still amazed. Now, Uncle, what is your plan? Do you plan to go back to the surface yet? Go back? No, of course not. We'll continue our journey, since it's going so well. But how can we go under this ocean? We're going to cross this great sea first. Then we should be able to find another opening at the opposite side. How wide do you think the sea is? 75 to 100 miles. Ah, I said, thinking this estimate to be wrong. So, we must leave tomorrow. I looked around for the ship that would take us across. Good, we'll go, but on what ship? No ships down here, but we'll go on a good raft. A raft? We can't build a ship or a raft. How will... Listen, Axel. Hans is building us a raft right now. He is using one of the trees from the forest that was already lying on the ground. We walked to meet Hans, who was working nearby. I was quite shocked to see a raft half finished. By the following evening, with Hans's great skill, the raft was finished. It was 10 feet long and 5 feet wide. We soon discovered that this raft floated quite calmly on the water of the Lidenbrock Sea. Chapter 32. On the morning of August 13th, we woke up early. It was time to begin our sea voyage. Hans had built a sail on the raft to guide us across the great sea. At 6 o'clock, the professor decided we should go. As we were leaving the harbor, my uncle decided that we should name it. He suggested giving it my name. I suggest that we name the harbor Grauben, Port Grauben. That will look good on a map. All right, then. It's Port Grauben. And that was how the memory of my darling Grauben became a part of our adventure. The wind was blowing strongly, which pushed us through the sea quickly. If we continue like this, he said, we'll go 75 miles in 24 hours, and we'll reach the opposite side of the sea very quickly. I said nothing, as I doubted that the sea was so small. Soon enough, we no longer saw land behind us, but rather saw the sea in every direction. At noon, we began to see seaweed. Some were longer than 300 or 400 feet long, which grew quite well under such pressure inside the earth. In the distance, we saw large snakes going quickly through the water. Evening came, but the electric light was still all around us. Soon after dinner, I lay down and went to sleep. Soon after we left Port Grauben, my uncle had told me to begin taking notes of our trip, about the direction we were going in, the speed of the raft, and the distance we went. Here are those notes I took. Friday, August 14th. There is a wind from the northwest. We are sailing fast and straight. The weather is fair. The clouds are thin and white. Temperature, 89 degrees. At noon, Hans started to fish for something for us to eat. For 2 hours he caught nothing, but then caught a large fish with great strength. "A fish?" cried my uncle. He then examined the fish carefully before announcing that such a type of fish had not lived on the surface of the earth for thousands of years. "What?" I exclaimed. "Do you mean we found a kind of fish that lived even before humans?" "Yes," my uncle answered, as he continued examining the fish. We continued fishing for the next 2 hours. and caught a great deal more of those ancient fish. Chapter 33. Saturday, August 15th. The sea has remained the same. No land in sight. My uncle was in a bad mood. He continued looking around, searching for land. I've noticed that he's becoming the impatient man he used to be before my recovery. Why should he get upset? Our journey is going quite well, and the raft is moving at a surprisingly quick speed. You seem worried, Uncle, I said to him today. Worried? No. But you look upset. Why? We're moving quite quickly. Our speed is not what upsets me. The sea is just too big. I remembered that before we left, he had announced his estimate of the sea to be 75 miles wide. But we had now gone 3 times that far, and we still hadn't seen land yet. We're not going down, the professor continued. This is all a waste of time. But, I said, we followed Sacnussemm's directions. But perhaps we haven't. Did Sacnussemm come to this sea? Did he cross the sea? Perhaps we have taken another path, letting the stream guide us. This site is amazing. We certainly can't regret coming here. Coming here has not been my goal. My plan was to get to the center of the earth, which I still have not done. I said nothing. At 6 o'clock in the evening, Hans asked for his pay. Sunday, August 16th. Nothing new. Same weather. Wind a little stronger. My uncle tried to measure the depth of the great sea using a rope. At 1,800 feet below the sea, there still was no bottom. We had tied one of the metal instruments to the rope before we put it in the water. When we brought the rope up again, Hans noticed there were large teeth marks on the instrument. Quite a large animal had bitten the instrument. This troubled me for the rest of the day. Monday, August 17th. I thought about the gigantic animals that lived on the earth thousands of years before humans. Those teeth marks looked as if they were made by one of those huge ancient animals. I looked at the guns we had brought to make sure they were in good condition. The surface of the water was now moving quickly over a large area, as if something below was moving around. Danger was near. Tuesday, August 18th. 2 hours after I had gone asleep that night, I was awakened as the raft was being lifted out of the water, after which it was thrown through the air. What happened? My uncle cried out. Hans pointed to a large, dark animal about 3,000 feet away. I noticed that it was a large whale, much larger than those in the ocean waters on the surface of the earth. Nearby there was another sea animal, similar to a snake. And farther away there was a huge crocodile. We were amazed to see the sea monsters. The smallest one of them could have easily broken our raft. Soon we saw 2 other animals fighting each other. One was a 40-foot turtle, and the other was a 30-foot snake. I then realized that our guns were useless against these unbelievable animals. But, fortunate for us, they had not noticed us, as they were enemies with each other. Soon, the only 2 animals on the surface of the water were the crocodile and the snake. They came quite close to us, but were swimming away, fighting each other savagely. Then, other sea animals joined the fight. The whale, another snake, and the sea turtle were now fighting as well. I pointed them out to Hans. He shook his head. "Dva," he said. "2? Does he mean that only 2 animals?" "He's right," cried my uncle. "But I can see the first of those animals has the mouth of a whale, the head of a snake, and the teeth of a crocodile." "And the other?" The other is a snake with a turtle's back. Hans was right. Only 2 sea animals were fighting. These 2 animals had existed millions of years ago on the surface of the earth, long before humans arrived. An hour passed, then 2. They continued fighting. Many times their fight came near the raft. Suddenly they went underwater, and the surface was calm. After a few minutes, however, the snake with the turtle's back was wounded and soon died. The other animal we never saw again. Chapter 34. Wednesday, August 19th. The wind was blowing hard, which helped us sail quickly across the sea. Thursday, August 20th. Temperature high, speed also high. Around noon we began to hear a sound from far away, but I did not know where the sound had come from. "Somewhere in the distance," the professor said, "there is a little island." 3 hours went by, and I realized that the sound was coming from a waterfall. My uncle disagreed, however. At 4 o'clock we saw that the water was being shot into the sky, although it was nearly 30 miles from us. We decided to get closer, and sometime later we were only 5 miles from it. We were afraid it was another sea monster, perhaps a whale, but it was nearly 100 times larger than whales on the surface of the earth. We looked at it in wonder, and I looked with fear. Suddenly Hans pointed, and my uncle translated that he had said island, which we then discovered it was. The water that we saw flying into the air was a natural geyser, just as we have on the surface of the earth. My uncle then decided we should explore this mysterious island. We landed immediately and went to the mysterious geyser. The water was terribly hot. I measured it to be nearly 325 degrees. So the water came from a source of heat. I then feared that perhaps closer to the earth, the temperatures rose dramatically, producing this geyser of extremely hot water. My uncle still doubted that the center of the earth was fire-hot. We stayed on the island for a short time before sailing again. My uncle calculated that we had sailed 675 miles from Port Gräuben, and we are now 1,550 miles from Iceland, under England. Chapter 35. Friday, August 21st. This morning the amazing geyser on Axel Island disappeared from our view. The weather was soon to change. The air was wet, there were many more thick clouds than before, and the sea was calm, just as before a storm. "There's going to be a storm," I said. Then there was silence between us as we watched the changing sky. The wind got much stronger, throwing us around the raft, although Hans did not seem to be affected by the changing weather. I suggested that we take down the sail, but my uncle refused, hoping it would take us closer to the south side of the sea. I feared that with the strong winds, however, the sail would fall and crush us. He still refused. Sunday, August 23rd. Where are we? We are moving through the sea at an incredible speed. Last night was horrible. The storm is still around us. Our ears are hurting greatly with the terrible sounds of the storm. We cannot even talk to each other. The lightning never stops, and it's always followed by the crack of loud thunder. The temperature is also much warmer now. Monday, August 24th. I wonder if this terrible storm will ever end. We're tired. Hans is the same as always. The raft is still moving quickly. We've traveled more than 500 miles from Axel Island. At noon, the storm became stronger. We haven't been able to talk to each other for 3 days. We only hear the sounds of the storm. My uncle came close to me and said something. I thought it was, "We're lost," but I wasn't sure. I answered by writing, "Let's take down the sail." He agreed. Just then a strong wind blew the sail down and flew off the raft. The electric light had, at times, become stronger during the storm. It was an electric storm. Late in the day, the winds and electrical lightning became stronger than ever and almost took me away. Soon after, however, the light disappeared. Where are we going? Where? Tuesday, August 25th. I just woke up. The storm is still strong. Lightning is everywhere. Are we still at sea? Yes, and moving quite quickly. We have passed under England, France, and maybe under all of Europe. I hear a new sound of waves breaking on rocks. Then, Chapter 36. That was the end of my notes on our sea adventure. So now I will explain as before. I do not know what happened when the raft hit the rocks on the shore, but I remember being thrown in the water. Hans then pulled me up onto the raft, and my body wasn't thrown against the rocks. The fearless man then carried me to a hot beach where my uncle was waiting. He then returned to the rocks to save our things. I was so tired and weak that I could not speak for an hour. Meanwhile, the rain was still falling from the mysterious sky. We went into a cave where Hans prepared food, but I couldn't eat. We all then fell asleep, after 3 long nights without sleep. The next day the weather was incredible. The sky and the sea were calm. The professor was cheerful as well. "Well, did you sleep well?" he asked. "I felt as if we were back in our house in Germany, in the same house as my dear Grauben." "I slept quite well. And how are you?" "I am excellent. We have come to the end of the sea. Now we'll travel by land again, and we'll really see the inside of the earth." "Uncle, what about going back? How will we return to the surface of the earth?" "Very simply. Once we get to the center of the earth, either we'll find a new way to the surface, or we'll come back the same way we came." My uncle then got his instruments to figure out our exact location. He was soon astonished to see that the direction we had gone was back to the same beach. During the storm, the wind had changed, and we had gone back to the same place we came from. My uncle was speechless. Chapter 37. First he was angry, then could not believe it, and finally he was angry. I have never seen a man so confused at first and then so angry. After our long journey over the sea, we had to do it all over again. We had gone backwards. "The sea has tricked me. Air, fire, and water have combined to stop me. Well, we'll see how my determination will help me against them. I won't give up. We'll see who wins, man or nature." "Listen to me," I said. "There's a limit to all the determination in the world. We must not fight against the impossible. We lost many of our supplies during the storm, and we are not ready for another sea adventure. We cannot travel another 1,000 miles in a storm again." I was able to argue my opinion for the next 10 minutes, but that was only because the professor was not listening to me. "To the raft!" he cried. That was his answer. Hans had just finished repairing the raft. It was as if that strange man already knew of my uncle's plans. What was I to do? I could not disagree with both of them. If Hans would support my opinion, then my uncle would listen. But the strange Icelander would not. "We're not leaving till tomorrow," my uncle said to me. "I must explore this place, since I have twice been taken here." "Yes," I said, "let's go exploring." We had come to the northern beach. Port Grauben was probably west of us. We walked along the beach and saw many bones from animals that had died many years ago. I saw the bones of some snakes and turtles that were nearly 15 feet long. I also noticed that the rocks on the beach were smooth. The movement of the sea had shaped them after many years. I believed that this underground sea had come from cracks in the surface of the earth. Water had escaped from the surface and into this hole, producing this incredible sea. However, the cracks were no longer, or the sea would have filled the hole in the earth. The rocks that I saw were once under water, but after a great deal of time, part of the water had evaporated. I was having these thoughts when my uncle called to me, "Axel! Axel, come here! I have found human bones!" Chapter 38. This discovery was quite important and related to an event that happened in France just before we began our journey. On March 28, 1863, workmen in southern France found human bones 14 feet below the surface of the earth. The bones proved that humans had lived on the earth thousands of years before scientists had believed. Many scientists in France, Germany, and England had many arguments about the findings. Some believed the bones to be fake, and others strongly believed them to be real, that these bones were nearly 100,000 years old. One of the strongest supporters of the bones being real was my uncle, Professor Lidenbrock. We examined the bones for a short time before we saw, only 60 feet from us, a man who had recently died. He was the same type of human alive on the surface of the earth 100,000 years ago. I was speechless. My uncle then forgot that he was no longer in a classroom in Germany teaching, but rather in the depths of the earth, because he soon began giving a speech about this mysterious ancient man. While he was speaking, I had many questions about this mysterious underground place. Had those people and animals fallen through cracks in the earth to come to live on the beach of the Lidenbrock Sea? Or had they lived in that underground world from birth to death? Could there be some underground man still living there? Chapter 39. We walked through the bones of animals for another half an hour. We kept going, curious about what else we would see. The beach was far behind us. The professor was not concerned with getting lost, and so we continued. We moved in silence under the electric light of the sky. Since the light was all around us, not coming from one place, there were no shadows. After walking a mile, we came to a great forest. It had no giant mushrooms like the one we had seen at Port Gräuben. Here, there were tall pine trees that are no longer on the surface of the earth. There was no color in the trees, without the light of the sun. Everything was rather the color brown with no smell. My uncle walked into the forest. I followed him. Then I saw different plants from around the world mixed together in that forest. I saw trees from Australia next to those from Norway and New Zealand. Suddenly I stopped, grabbing my uncle's arm. Far away in the forest I saw a huge animal moving. I then saw a large group of ancient elephants, such animals that were no longer anywhere on the surface. Then my uncle pointed into the distance. I was then shocked to see an ancient human in the forest. This human was standing next to a tree, watching the group of ancient elephants go by. This was not like the ones we saw near the beach. Rather, this man was a giant. He was more than 12 feet tall. I was afraid we would soon be in danger if we went farther into the forest. My uncle finally agreed, and we were soon back on the beach. Now, I think back to that time in the underground forest after so many months have gone by, and still cannot believe that we saw ancient humans living under the surface of the earth. Our eyes must have been lying to us. It is impossible. Humans living inside the earth, with no communication with those living on the surface. It's crazy. I prefer to believe that we saw an animal that was built looking similar to a human being, but not actually a human. But what we saw was much larger than any human that has ever lived on the surface of the earth. A man living his entire life inside the earth. Never. We left the forest in silence, shocked by what we had seen. We were running, perhaps afraid of what we had just seen. We went back to the Lidenbrock Sea. Though I was sure we were going a different way than we had come to the forest, I saw rocks that looked like those at Port Gräuben. I then knew that we were now on the north beach of the Lidenbrock Sea. I then told my uncle of my suspicions about our location. We obviously didn't come back exactly to our starting point at Port Gräuben, but we are near it.
Are you sure you're right, Axel?
No, I can't be sure because all these rocks look alike.
Well, Axel, if this were Port Gräuben, we'd see things that we went by, or reminders of our presence here, and I don't see anything.
But I do see something, I said, as I picked up a knife I saw lying on the ground. I showed my uncle the old knife I found on the ground.
So you brought that knife with you?
He asked. No, I didn't bring it. Didn't you?
No, I've never had a knife like that.
But, Axel, Icelanders often have such knives. This one belongs to Hans, and he lost it. I disagreed, knowing that Hans had never had it. My uncle silently examined the knife.
This knife looks old, Axel. Someone who has come before us lost this knife, and it had been in the sea for a great deal of time, but the storm has brought it to this beach.
We then walked along the beach and saw between two rocks the entrance to a dark passageway. There, on one of the rocks, appeared two mysterious letters in ancient Icelandic.
A.S., cried my uncle. Arni Sacnussemm. Arni Sacnussemm again.
Chapter 40. Since the beginning of our journey, I had been astonished many times. I thought by now nothing else could surprise me, but I was speechless with shock after seeing those two letters that had been there for the past 300 years. I could no longer deny the existence of the traveler and his remarkable journey.
Let's go, I cried.
I was running into the dark passage when the professor stopped me. He, always the impatient one, told me to be calm and patient.
First, let's go back to Hans, he said, and bring the raft here. Sacnussemm, you genius, you led us here. This place will now be called Cape Sacnussemm, I declare.
Do you realize, Uncle, I said as we walked back, that this underground world has brought us here?
You think so, Axel?
Yes, I do.
Even the storm brought us back to this point. Do you realize that now we only have to go down another 3,700 miles to get to the center of the earth?
Well, let's get started, I said. When we arrived, Hans had already put our things on the raft and was ready for our departure. We went on the raft and were ready to sail to Cape Sacnussemm. Finally, after 3 hours, at about 6 o'clock in the evening, we arrived. I was now more excited than ever for the rest of our journey. I suggested that we burn the raft so we would not turn back, but my uncle refused. He now seemed to have lost his eagerness for the trip. Let's leave as quickly as possible, I said.
Of course, but first we'll examine this new passage to see if we need to prepare anything.
We then walked to the cave where the passageway was located. The opening was only 20 yards away. When we had taken a few steps inside, we discovered that rocks blocked us from entering the passage.
Damn this rock,
I said, angry that we now had a problem. We looked left and right, up and down, but the passage was completely blocked, and there was no other way to enter. I was quite disappointed and refused to give up. I examined the bottom of the rock, then the top. There were no holes anywhere. Hans moved the lantern all over the rock, examining each part, without finding any way to enter. We had to give up. I sat down on the ground while my uncle walked around thinking. "But what about Sacnussemm?" I asked. "Yes," my uncle said. "I wonder if he was stopped by this rock." No, I said. "The rock must have suddenly closed this passage. It must have fallen many years after Sacnussemm had come. Look, there are cracks in the ceiling that look recent. It's made of separate pieces, huge stones. But one day the pressure on the ceiling increased and it fell. It's a problem that Sacnussemm didn't have to deal with. If we can't find a way past it, we will never reach the center of the earth." That was how I talked. I had received the eager excitement that my professor had when we began the journey. I no longer thought about my life on the surface of the earth, not even about my poor Grauben, who must have believed I was dead somewhere in the earth. I was only concerned with this goal of reaching the center of the earth. "All right, then," my uncle said. "Let's use our tools to make a hole in the rock. We won't let this rock stop us." "It's too hard for the tools," I said. "But gunpowder. We'll use gunpowder to blow up the rock." "Gunpowder?" "Yes. All we have to do is break one piece of the rock." "Hans, let's go to work," my uncle said loudly. Hans went back to the raft to get his tools, then began digging a hole for the gunpowder, which would cause an explosion. He had to make a hole big enough to hold 50 pounds of gunpowder, which would produce a massive explosion. "We'll get through," I said. "We'll get through," my uncle responded. By midnight we were ready, but my uncle decided we would wait till the morning. I had to wait another 6 long hours. Chapter 41. The next day, Thursday, August 27th, was an incredible day in our underground journey. Whenever I remember it, I am filled with fear. From that time on, our skill and reason were no use, and we had to rely on nature. At 6 o'clock we were already up. We were ready to blast our way through the passage. I requested to begin the explosion, then I would run back to the raft, where my uncle and Hans would be waiting for me, as we did not know how large the explosion would be. The rope would burn for 10 minutes before lighting the gunpowder, so I would have a great deal of time to reach the raft. After a quick meal, my uncle and Hans went to the raft while I waited on the beach. I then went to light the rope, and quickly ran back to the raft. We then went nearly 100 feet into the sea to wait. 5 more minutes, my uncle said. Then 4 more. Then 3 more. 2 more. 1. Now fall, you rocks. What happened next? I didn't hear the explosion, but saw that the shape of the rocks suddenly changed. They opened quickly, and there was a large hole in the beach. The sea threw our raft up, and in less than a second we were in total darkness. Then the raft fell again. We had gone through the passageway, but were riding on the water. An hour passed, maybe 2. I don't know how long it was. We held onto each other to keep from falling off the raft. We were taking Sacnussemm's path, but we had impatiently taken the sea with us as well. We were now in total darkness, but after a short time I was surprised to see a light. Hans had lit one of the lanterns. The passage was now quite wide, and we were flowing downward through the passage rather fast. I estimated that we were moving at 70 or 80 miles an hour. My uncle and I looked at each other with tired eyes. We were moving along too quickly for us to stop. Meanwhile, the hours were passing. We continued this way for many hours. I saw that we had lost most of our things after the explosion. I noticed that we had lost most of the food and only had enough for one day, but it seemed that we were being taken to our deaths through the passage. Why worry about starving when there were so many other ways we could possibly die very soon? Then, however, I suddenly forgot about the danger we were in. I felt that perhaps there was a way to escape and return to the surface of the earth. How? I didn't know. Where? It didn't matter. I thought of telling my uncle about our situation, but I said nothing, not wanting to worry him. Just then the light of the lantern went out. We were now in total darkness. After a rather long time, I felt that we were going much faster and steeper. I believe we were falling rather than floating. We held on to each other tightly. Suddenly the raft hit another object, then water came down on us. Within a few seconds, however, we were no longer underwater, and the raft was still carrying the three of us. Chapter 42. I suppose it was then about 10 o'clock at night. After so many hours of hearing the loud water rushing, I heard silence. The water had stopped. "We're going up," my uncle exclaimed. "What?" "Yes, we're going up. We're going up." I reached out to touch the wall, and I discovered that we were going up very quickly. Hans then lit one of the lanterns, and I could see that we were in a narrow passage, perhaps only 25 feet wide. "The water has reached the bottom and is now going back up to its level, taking us with it." "Where are we going?" "I don't know, but we have to be ready for anything. We're rising nearly 12 feet a second, or 720 feet a minute, or 8 miles an hour. It shouldn't take too long to go a long distance. Hopefully we'll be able to get out of this passage, but if it's blocked, the air will be replaced by water and we'll be crushed." "Axel," my uncle said very calmly, "our situation is almost hopeless, but we may have a chance to survive. So let's be looking for every opportunity to live. But what should we do?" "We must eat to keep strong." I then looked at him with disappointment. Now I had to tell him that there was not much food left. "What?" my uncle cried. "We've lost our food." "Yes," I answered. "Here's all that's left. 1 piece of dried meat for the 3 of us." He was silent. "Well," I said, "do you still think we can be saved?" He didn't answer. An hour went by. I was beginning to feel hunger. Hans and my uncle were suffering as well, but we all refused to eat the bit we had left. We kept rising quickly. Sometimes it was difficult to breathe as we were rising so quickly. The heat was rising as well. The temperature was surely over 100 degrees. Why was the temperature rising so quickly now? Were we going into a part of the earth with fire-hot temperatures? Another hour went by. The temperature increased a bit, but our situation was still the same. "Listen," said my uncle. "We must decide something." "What?" I asked. "We must get our strength back. If we attempt to lengthen our lives by a few hours waiting to eat our food, we'll be weak till our deaths." "Yes, and the end of our lives will come quickly." "If we have an opportunity to save ourselves, we must be strong. I suggest that we eat the bit of food we have left now." "What? You still think we have a chance to survive?" "Yes, of course. As long as we are alive, we have a chance to survive." How brave my uncle was. "What do you think we should do?" I asked. "Eat the rest of the food. Then we'll be strong." "All right, then. Let's eat," I said. We ate in silence. My uncle ate quickly. Hans ate calmly. and I ate without tasting the food. After the meal, I began thinking of my life in Germany and my darling Grauben. My uncle was still thinking about our situation, thinking of how we could escape death. He was talking to himself and examining the rock wall, which was now quite hot as well. I began thinking about our situation as well, listening to my uncle. The water was boiling hot. So were the rocks. I looked at the instrument giving our direction, but it was going around in circles. It had gone mad. We were at the center of the earth. Chapter 43. Yes, it had gone mad. We were not going north, south, east, or west. As we rose in that passage, we heard many explosions, which sounded quite frightening. "Uncle, Uncle," I cried, "we're going to die." "Now, what are you afraid of?" he replied calmly. "What's the matter?" "What's the matter? Look at those walls and the falling rock, and the heat, the boiling water, the thick air. These are all signs of an earthquake." My uncle disagreed. "An earthquake?" he said. "Yes, I think you're mistaken." "No, I'm expecting something better than an earthquake." "What?" "An explosion. We're going to rise into a volcano, Axel." "A volcano?" "Yes, I think so," the professor said with a smile. "And it's the best thing that could happen to us. We're going to be thrown out of a volcano. This is our only chance of getting back to the surface of the earth." My uncle was right, and he spoke so calmly. We were still going up all night. There was boiling water under the raft, and under the water was hot lava waiting to escape from a volcano. We were certainly in the northern region, as the instruments showed we were going north now. Toward morning, we began moving faster. As we came closer to the surface, the heat became greater because there was more lava under us, pushing the heat towards us. Then I suddenly saw some light. I could see fire on the walls. "Look, Uncle, look!" I cried. "Those are perfectly natural in a volcano during an explosion. The walls are widening, so we'll be able to stay away from the fire. Now, there is no longer water, only fire-hot lava under us." At about 8 in the morning, the raft suddenly stopped for the first time. We were no longer moving. "What's happened?" I asked. "We've stopped, but don't worry. We'll soon be going to the opening of the volcano again." Soon enough, the raft did begin moving again, but often stopped for a few moments at a time. We were then moving quickly. We all had to hold on to the raft, or we would have fallen off. Hans's strong arms saved me more than once from hitting the wall. Therefore, my memory of the event is not clear during the next few hours. The last memory I have of being in that volcano was feeling like I was being pushed toward my death of being burned. Chapter 44. When I opened my eyes again, Hans' strong arm was holding on to me. With his other arm, he was supporting my uncle. I wasn't badly hurt, but tired and hungry. I was lying on the side of a mountain. Hans had rescued me from death after I had come out of the mountain. "Where are we?" my uncle asked, looking annoyed. "In Iceland," I answered. "Nej," Hans said. "What do you mean, no?" the professor asked. "Hans is mistaken," I said. I was shocked to feel the strong heat and see olive trees only grown in warm climates, not Iceland. After walking for 2 hours, we saw a young child walking. He looked frightened to see us and started to run away. Hans ran after him and brought him back. My uncle tried speaking to him in German, but the boy said nothing. Then he tried English, French, and finally Italian. The boy then responded that we were in Stromboli, Italy. We were astonished. Ah, what a journey! What a wonderful journey! Having gone through one volcano, we have come out through another, more than 3,000 miles from Sneffels. After a delicious meal of fruit and cool water, we went to the harbor of Stromboli. We decided not to tell the villagers where we had come from, as we did not want to upset them. Instead, we told them we had lost our ship in a storm.
But the instrument! I don't understand. It pointed north. How can we explain that?
We don't have to explain that, I said.
You can't be serious. That would be a horrible thing for a professor and a scientist to do. I must find the reason.
Soon after, we reached the harbor, where Hans asked for his 13th week's wages. My uncle gave it to him. Then he and I shook his hand, smiling. Hans, showing more emotion than I had ever seen, shook our hands warmly and smiled. Chapter 45. Here is the conclusion of a story that many people have refused to believe. The Stromboli fishermen were kind, giving us food and clothing. After waiting 48 hours, we were taken to another town, where we rested for a few days. On Friday, September 4th, we took a ship to Marseille, France, and finally arrived in Hamburg on September 9th. Martha was surprised and Grauben was overjoyed.
"Now that you're a hero, Axel,"
my fiancée said to me,
"you'll never have to leave me again."
I looked at her. She smiled with tears in her eyes. Martha had told everyone in town where my uncle and I had planned to go. When we returned to Hamburg, the news of our journey had spread all over the world. People had refused to believe it, and when they saw him again, they still didn't believe it. But Hans was with us as well. And with various pieces of news from Iceland, people began to believe our story. My uncle then became a great man, and I was the great man's nephew, and the city of Hamburg gave us a great celebration. He explained the story of our journey and how we had discovered the path thanks to the courageous Arne Sacnussemm. Other scientists became quite envious of my uncle's success. Hans soon left Hamburg, as he missed his beloved Iceland dearly. We were quite upset when he left, as the three of us had become quite close. He had saved our lives many times during our journey, and we will never forget him. I'm sure I will see him again before my death. "Farewell," he said one day, and soon left for Rakiovic, where he arrived safely. Farewell, Hans. Journey to the Center of the Earth was popular all over the world and was translated into hundreds of languages. Although my uncle was now famous, he was still upset about something during our trip. He still could not explain the directional instrument's problem during the last part of the trip. One day, I was in his study, and I noticed the famous instrument and began observing it. It had been there for 6 quiet months. Suddenly, I figured out the reason for its problem.
"What's the matter?" my uncle asked.
"Look, its needle is pointing south instead of north. After we arrived at Cape Sacnussemm, the needle switched positions."
"Then that explains our mistake." "Yes. Tell me, my boy."
"During the storm on the Lidenbrock Sea, the lightning hit the raft and magnetized the metal and reversed the direction of the instrument."
"Ah!" my uncle exclaimed, laughing. "So it was a trick that electricity played."
From then on, my uncle was the happiest scientist on earth, and I was the happiest of men, because my lovely Grauben agreed to marry me, and we lived together with my uncle and dear Martha in the same house. My uncle, Professor Lidenbrock, became an expert on earth studies and was asked to speak all over the world.